Hello, dear viewers. A word before we begin, perhaps? I decided to take on this challenge once more almost immediately after I posted my original development history video, as something changed within me. I believe you can hear when Herring was born at the end of that video. And as I am creating this new work, the old documentary, Squadron 42 Forever 2 Years Away, will be unlisted. But it will still be available only via the link in the description for historical purposes. Because this time I want to do the subject justice by instead flipping my strategy from last time on its head and not allow, for the most part, the developers to speak for themselves, and I will instead put words in their mouths. No, I will to the best of my ability strive to summarize the long, arduous and tedious development history of Squadron 42 with full narration by yours truly, with interjections as fitting by the developers. I wish to reduce the running time as much as possible in comparison to my previous work by increasing the amount of information given to you to ensure that any viewer is caught up with the highs and the lows of this game's development, as we do indeed appear to be in the end game now, with the release year being 2026, allegedly. But I also find it important to say that by understanding the long development of Squadron 42, you will garner a far better understanding for the development of Star Citizen as well. Because of how these games are intertwined and how they have affected each other, it is far easier to look at Star Citizen through the lens of Squadron than vice versa. The main focus has most often been on Star Citizen, which has gotten the most publicity over the years. But over the course of this retrospective, you will see how these projects go from being, in a way, the very same game to separating into two experiences with a shared engine, universe, and resources. My goal is to stay as factual and non-biased as possible, with jokes and memes along the way, but I intend this work to potentially be something one could fall asleep to, so I promise that there are going to be no loud noises, at least by myself. If the devs start hollering, that's on them.
And then we get some drinks and I'll be there and sign things and okay.
This documentary or retrospective, call it whatever the hell you want, will, through a year-by-year basis, follow the development of Star Citizen and Squadron 42, but mostly Squadron 42, up until the current day, from the early beginnings up until the posting of this video. And my intent is to decisively catalog as much information on Squadron 42 in as digestible of a format as possible. The sources for this video will be found in a Google document which can be found in the description below. I will try to keep it neat and tidy, or maybe I'll forget about it, because you are indeed getting the whole script, not just the sources, because I'm just that nice. Lazy. If you do not wish to know more about the creator of this little project or where I stand, then you can skip to this timestamp to get into the meat of it all. As an added note before we begin with the history of the game, I'd like to introduce myself as to where I stand in regards to this project overall, so you can understand the perspective from which I view this game, or games if you count Star Citizen. I am of course Herring, and I make videos primarily about Star Citizen, Squadron 42 and other game-related topics, with some toe-dippings into TV when I feel like it. I am a concierge-level backer of the Star Citizen and Squadron 42 project, meaning that I have achieved that most coveted title after having spent at least $1,000 on the game. Or games. I've backed this project for the better or worse since 2014 when I was 16 years old. And I still think that these people can pull this off, because bringing a dream into reality is not always a pretty process, but an arduous one. I just didn't think it was going to be this arduous. This of course means I have a vested interest in the success of these games, but I believe if you take a look at my previous content in regards to Star Citizen and Squadron, that I am neither a relentless fanboy nor a hater of CIG. I believe accountability is something that must be taken from both the community, which are the primary investors of the project, and An Imperium, the developers. I will never hesitate to criticize either side, and I hope that I'm very clear that I strive to be as accurate and factual as possible whilst keeping the glint in my eye and maintaining some level of humor about all this, because otherwise it has a tendency of getting rather sad, bitter, and dull. The goal of this channel is to inform people to the best of my ability, but also the most critical factor is my number one goal: to entertain you as much as possible. And I hope to do that today. Without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
And it's like, well, people don't even know.
Lay down the line. Very fast. And it wouldn't be cloud.
Another edition of the brand new reverse-to-verse line.
I'm hoping to show you a Squadron 42 mission, and we're not quite there yet, so we got very close.
16 times on the tip.
Then we get some drink.
We will not lose the system.
All right, gentlemen, fire up.
Now, I know you're all asking, when can I play it?
Sit back in your seats. This is going to be a hell of a ride.
Chris Roberts, the founder of An Imperium Games and the guiding hand of Squadron 42 and its sister game, Star Citizen, needs no introduction. Who am I kidding? Of course he does. Christopher Roberts was born on the 27th of May in 1968 in Redwood City, California, to a British father and an American mother, with a younger brother, Aaron, joining the family just 2 years later on March 3rd in 1970. This horrifying mixture of American and British would later lead to his rather peculiar manner of speaking.
Is it partners like Behavior or Turbulent feel? And then we get some drinks, and I'll be there and sign things, and okay.
And then I migrated to the BBC microcomputer, and then went on to Commodore 64, and then on to IBM.
The Roberts would spend most of their time growing up and attending school in England, in and around Manchester. Chris would later attend school and show an affinity and interest in creating video games. And as a teenager, he developed several video games for the BBC Micro that would be of a high enough quality to be published, such as Striker's Run, Wizardor, and King Kong. But opportunity waits for no man, and Chris would later in life return to the United States in 1986, now 18, to visit his parents who were living in Austin, Texas at the time. Chris would like his stay in the United States so much that he decided to make the move there himself. The weather probably not having anything to do with it. There in Texas, due to his continued interest in video games, he'd eventually start rubbing shoulders with another titan of the gaming industry, Richard Garriott. Richard would later become one of the first private astronauts, and he would also become famous for becoming the second space traveler ever to have had a parent go to space before them. A second generation, if you will. But of course, Richard is most famous for being a highly accomplished games developer before deciding to blast himself off to space. Chris Roberts would develop the games Times of Lore in 1988 and Bad Blood in 1990 whilst working for Richard Garriott's company, Origin Systems, as a contractor, with the Times of Lore making its way to influence the later user interface for the Ultima series. However, through his work at Origin Systems, he'd soon be considered a key figure and thus become more of a permanent in-house developer, eventually landing the job as Vice President of New Technology, becoming an official employee. Origin Systems is also where the Star Citizen manufacturer Origin Jump Works would get its name from, being a nod to Chris's time there. But at Origin Systems, Chris would go on to develop something that had turned him from a respected games developer to a far more famous maverick, and one could say a bit of a titan of the gaming industry. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am of course speaking of In 1990, Chris Roberts would go on to release the game series that to this day is considered his greatest success and perhaps his opus, Wing Commander. You take the role as a hotshot fighter pilot, Christopher Maverick Blair. Really subtle there, Chris. Fighting in a desperate decades-long war for the Terran Confederation against the Kilrathi Empire, a cat-like race that is striving to eradicate the human race from the galaxy. With you, the player, having an effect on the story per your performance that is recorded, and this is something that we will hear more of later. The games would go on from being a purely animated game experience to introducing more film-like aspects, eventually leading to 1994's Wing Commander 3, The Heart of the Tiger, which would have full motion video performances by such names as Mark Hamill, John Rhys-Davies, Malcolm McDowell, and of course, Biff Tannen, also known as Tom Wilson.
I'll bet you stay up late nights just polishing it, huh? No, as a matter of fact, I have majors who do that for me.
Boasting a budget of $4 to $5 million, which is roughly $9 million in today's Monopoly money, most of the money went towards the hiring of actors and filming over 2 hours of live-action footage, or FMVs, which stands for full motion video. This footage was directed by Chris Roberts, giving him his first taste of directing that would not be his last. Wing Commander 3 would however be worth every penny, as the game was a smash hit, making $15.9 million, or roughly $35 million in today's money, tripling their money and smashing records at the time. These games pioneered several new things, such as focusing heavily on the cinematic storytelling reminiscent of Star Wars, action-packed gameplay, and immersion for the player, which of course was no small feat for the 90s, as this was practically unheard of at the time. You as the player were left as the main character in a story that you could control, and you could destroy the bad guys yourself, not just watch Luke Skywalker do it. You got to meet interesting characters and form relationships with them. Your choices or abilities could lead to the death of your wingman if you weren't careful. You got to pick and choose who you flew with, what ship you wanted to pick, and ultimately, you pulled the trigger. Which is of course some of the reasons why they became such massive successes in the 90s. These games did not only generate massive revenue for the time, they also pioneered new gaming concepts, but also pushed PC gaming into the mainstream from the fringes. Gaming was of course at the time dominated by the console wars by such companies as Nintendo or Sega. Wing Commander 3 was of course followed by Wing Commander 4, The Price of Freedom, which made a giant leap in the production budget with $14 million in 1996, which is of course $30 million today. This massive budget that the game boasted rivaled not games at the time, but actual Hollywood movies. This was, for the time, the most expensive game production in history, which can be seen in its high-quality FMVs. It was originally intended to be released in December of 1995, but was delayed until February 8th, 1996. The game would go on to become a success critically, but would barely make back its original budget. And thus the later installment of Wing Commander, Prophecy, would scale back the budget and production costs.
The ultimate sequel to the ultimate game ever.
Going back in time for a bit, Aaron Roberts, Chris's brother, had followed in his brother's footsteps and also maintained an interest in developing games, becoming highly accomplished in his own right as the years passed. Aaron would work on the Wing Commander series with his brother and make Wing Commander Privateer in 1993, which also became a cult classic in its own right. Chris was at the time working on the game Strike Commander with no relation to the Wing Commander series. Strike Commander, of course, being famous for its use of groundbreaking 3D technology and high fidelity, and also for its unheard of number of production delays, leading to, at the time, a massive 4-year development time. The tech that the game used would of course be used in other Origin system projects, but this long development overrun is something that Chris would set a trend for, that Chris would later become notorious for. But hold on to your jump seats, for at the end of the 90s, in 1999, Wing Commander would finally make it to the big screen, with the movie named Wing Commander, which was Chris Roberts' movie directorial debut, starring such names as Freddie Prinze Jr., Matthew Lillard, and Matthew Souchet. And it would become a massive box office bomb and a total critical failure, still celebrated as one of the worst films of all time, not even in a funny way. But speaking of the funnies, people would funnily enough mostly go to see this disaster of a film because the previews had Star Wars The Phantom Menace's trailer in it. And even more funnily, if you had gotten past the previews, you were no longer eligible for a refund. So people would literally pay just to see the trailer of Star Wars and then leave. The actors would even have this to say on the matter in regards to what happened and why the movie became such a mess. I can't stand Wing Commander. I can't watch one scene of that movie. I read the script and loved it. So did my buddy Matthew Lillard. We both got the parts, we went on location, and they said, here's the new script. It was a piece of shit. In spite of the disaster that was the movie, Wing Commander is still regarded as one of the greatest game series of all time, especially from the 90s era, both for its groundbreaking visuals, storytelling, and immersion, and its use of new technologies. Through the games, the novels, the TV show, but probably not the movie, it helped to sell PC gaming to the masses, and over its lifetime the series would gross a grand total of $110 million, with the last release in the franchise being Wing Commander Arena in 2007. But for now, we must go back in time, back to 1996. When Chris Roberts finally decided that it was time for him to part ways with Origin Systems, because he wanted to found his own company with his brother Aaron and another figure we'll hear from again, Tony Zurovic. Have you seen this man? Digital Anvil was founded due to Chris Roberts' desire to have a smaller group of developers to focus on creating fewer but more high-quality games each year. They also produced visual effects for movies, but the most important factor was that Chris felt that he wanted to produce games set in his own universe to make games or movies in. Because Electronic Arts had acquired Origin Systems during the 90s and didn't care for movies, so Chris decided to move on. And then he turned around and he made the Wing Commander movie. Whoops. And this poor view and relationship with publishers would be something that'd be a theme in the story of Chris Roberts. Digital Anvil developed such games as Starlancer, which was worked on alongside Warthog Studios. Starlancer, however, was mostly managed by Aaron Roberts instead of Chris. And during his time leading DA, Chris would start development of a game that he would become infamous for. Freelancer's development was started in 1997 and was spearheaded by Chris Roberts himself. It was intended to revolutionize the gaming world with a focus on immersion and a more dynamic, living space sandbox universe MMO. Ever heard of that before? Servers with 128 players in a persistent multiplayer universe, a dynamic economy, weather and environments, groundbreaking technology, and most importantly, freedom. You could become whatever you wished in this sandbox universe, and it would soon be at your fingertips. Right? No. Due to the sheer scope and vision of the game, DA soon found itself in severe financial troubles, eventually being so bad it had to be acquired and bailed out by Microsoft in December of 2000 to prevent bankruptcy. Freelancer was in development hell for 6 long years, but eventually came to release in 2003 with a drastically reduced scope, with it only becoming a single-player game, still being a critical success for players adoring and enjoying it to this day, but far from the vision that Chris Roberts had originally intended. After the acquisition, Chris decided to leave DA while still maintaining a position as a consultant on Freelancer. Famously, Microsoft and Chris had a severely strained relationship, particularly harming the ego of a visionary such as Chris, that he was forced from the role of a funded partner to that of an employee, or as it would come to, an exiting founder. Chris Roberts would leave to, quote, pursue other creative endeavors. But a more honest statement from him is probably this.
Fuck Microsoft!
During the development of Freelancer, Chris had founded Fever Pitch Studios in 2001, and during its 2-year lifespan, it only created one title, Conquest Frontier Wars, but most of the development had taken place at Digital Anvil. Fever Pitch Studios was later acquired by Warthog Games in 2003 for $300,000, becoming Warthog Texas. After his departure from DA and the sale of Fever Pitch Studios, Roberts would decide to take a hiatus from games development, instead desiring to focus on film production, which can of course be considered a bit surprising after the sting of the failed Wing Commander film. Undaunted, Chris set out for Hollywood and the movie industry. Chris would found the film and television company Point of No Return Entertainment in 2001, with the aim to produce 12 films over 5 years and a TV series, with the main goal seeming to have been to produce a Wing Commander series. Roberts was provided with roughly $50 million in funding for the development of these films, but it ultimately came to naught and nothing was ever produced. I could not find what happened to these $50 million. Perhaps it could be assumed that this money went towards the later founding of his next project, Ascendant Pictures, in March of 2002. Chris would go on to produce such movies as The Punisher, Outlander, and surprisingly, Lord of War, 2 of which are guilty pleasure movies of mine and one that is considered a fantastic film. But alas, spending the 2000s making movies left Chris wanting, as he still wished to create universes and media that one could get lost in, a feeling that would only grow with time. And even though Chris loved to produce and create movies, the games industry still called to him. But before making his return to games, Chris would at this time partake in the ever-so-famous German tax loophole, which was a popular way to fund movies at the time, which is why Uwe Boll managed to create all of his masterpieces. And I know nothing about German tax law, so I'm going to utilize AI to explain it to me because I have no idea how German tax law works. The German film tax loophole, active until 2005, allowed high-earning German investors to write off 100% of their film investments against their income tax immediately. Used heavily by Hollywood, this allowed studios to produce films by shifting tax risks to German investors, who often utilized leverage to boost tax savings. Approximately 70% of the funds raised via this method went towards Hollywood films, with movies like Lord of the Rings and Mission Impossible 2 being standouts. But alas, eventually even the government caught on to the loophole and it was later closed in 2005 to 2006, which meant that the money printer and their money shop was closed for Chris & Co. One could say that this dubious way of funding isn't exactly the greatest reflection on those whom took part, but hey, free money is free money. As time passed, games technology, graphics, and capabilities steadily increased, with Roberts playing such games as Mass Effect where he could immerse himself in the world. This nagging sensation would eventually overcome him, and Bigfoot Entertainment would acquire Ascendant Pictures in 2010, with Chris departing. Picture this: you are a former video game industry maverick with decades of experience, but now you are a bit out of the loop. You want to create not just a game, but a living, breathing universe. To achieve that nagging dream that you've always pursued but never quite been able to reach out and grasp. So what do you do? And how do you do this? You of course start with the foundation. You start with the engine. But there are of course many engines on the market, so which one do you choose? Unreal? Unity? Source? Or maybe even the CryEngine? But why choose the CryEngine? Is that not an FPS engine designed to melt computers and look pretty? Well, yes, but hidden beneath it hides so much more. Here I must take the time to highly recommend £10.42's video on this matter in regards to engine choice. It is fantastic. I am not as well versed in the technicalities of games, especially the engines. This is where the wonderful £10 picks up the slack. Link to his video in the description below. But more on the choice of CryEngine from the man that practically sold the CryEngine to Chris Roberts, Sean Tracy.
Oh, wow. It's sort of a long story, I guess. I was one of the very originals. Well, it was really interesting. Back in 2010, I think it was, Chris came into my office with Ortwin, and my office being the GDC CryEngine booth. And we started talking about how to do a space game on the CryEngine. And this was back in 2010. And a lot of people, and hell, a lot of people still even now are like, well, CryEngine can't do that. I don't know how you'd ever do such large environments, how you'd ever carry around so many ships, because, it was mostly FPS engine. But what a lot of people don't see is all the other games that are being made on it. And my job at CryTek, I was the U.S. business director, so I was actually doing all the licensing of the engine to all the companies using it. So guys like Turtle Rock for Evolve. I'm trying to think of the ones that have been all announced because I don't want to break some NDA from CryTek or anything. But there's been a bunch of CryEngine games since then. Arcade, that's a big MMO. So I already knew that there was lots of ways to actually get around this stuff. So Chris, being how he is. He wanted kind of some proof, basically. So we gave him the SDK. He started building up the Hornet. So that was the very first ship that he sort of built up. He implemented all these thrusters and things like this. And this was after our first little demo. Then we met up. I think it was about 6 months later, or it might even been an entire year later. And he came in with an implementation of his own ship, right? Flying around pretty much. He had asked us how to do a space environment, so showed him how to get rid of all the terrain, how you can just be flying around, things like this. So he came in, and we were super impressed with the fact that he did this himself, because I had dealt with so many different CEOs, even tech directors that wouldn't write a single line of code themselves, right? So they would come in, they would just have to take our word for it and then go from there. So he actually did work within the vehicle system. He was super happy with what he was seeing there, and just wanted to know how to go a little bit bigger with it. Now, I got pretty excited about this, and one of the ways that I moved up pretty quick within CryTek is that I can put together a prototype very, very quickly, as you saw with the Planet stuff. We just had the tech, but yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. So then what I did, I recruited a guy named Hannes Apfel, who now works for us as well. He's the cinematics director, as well as Paul Reindell. And we were all still at CryTek at the time. And what I had said to them was listen, we really want to close this license. This will be an amazing game to have on the CryEngine. So what we did was put together that very first crowdfunding video that you guys saw. So that video changed very little, but what we did was we put that prototype together and we delivered it to Chris as is.
Chris Roberts, his wife Sandy Gardner, and Ortwin Freyamuth, the alleged wizard,
And now for something completely different.
would found Cloud Imperium Games in April of 2012. Now we're going to take a brief look into the founders of CIG to get a bearing on the other individuals, not just Chris. Sandy Gardner is, as mentioned, the wife of Chris Roberts, which was unknown at the time as they didn't make this relationship clear.
That I signed on to this project because I truly believed in Chris's vision, and I really wanted to help him make this vision come true. Being his wife, as you all know, it's not a secret.
Thank you, Miss Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Which was a rather strange move, as she does have a master's in business and marketing. She initially interviewed for the role of VP of marketing, working as a consultant for CIG, before eventually deciding to come on as the VP of Marketing herself. Her relationship to Chris not being clear to the community being an odd choice was compounded by the fact that Aaron Roberts, his brother, and numerous friends from previous games they had worked on was never a big deal. So the unnecessary smoke and mirrors was the first of many unforced errors by CIG. Sandy is also featured in Squadron 42 as the character called Pusher, and works at CIG up until the current day. If you wish to know more about what she allegedly did before joining CIG, please do not read the Forbes article. Please. Ortwin Freymuth is likely to be a character in the history of Cloud Imperium games that the majority of the community have never heard of, because he is an alleged wizard that has cast spells upon the community to disguise himself. Ortwin, however, remains one of the key figures behind the founding of Cloud Imperium. He worked together with Chris in order to secure private investors to fund the project, but this endeavor proved difficult and worked together to develop and further the crowdfunding model instead. Ortwin would go on to become vice chair and general counsel, but stepping down from these roles in 2023 and 2024. But as far as I've been able to discern, still remains a member of the board of Cloud Imperium Games UK Limited. But now, as we are introduced to all of the characters in the beginning of this story, it is time for Ortwin, Sandy, and Chris to finally see if their desire to move towards a crowdfunded model will prove fruitful, at the Game Developers Conference online in Austin, Texas. Finally, Chris decided to make his ridiculously triumphant return into gaming, leveraging the capital of player love that he had earned through the years with the classics of Wing Commander and Freelancer. The work that Chris, Sean, and others had put towards creating these assets for just about a year would later lead to this, at the time, rather stunning first display of the Bengal carrier, marking the first entry of Star Citizen and Squadron 42 into the world. And here I shall give you a short snippet of the resulting work. Interestingly, however, the first game on display was not Star Citizen, but Squadron 42. And as he speaks, we can clearly tell how intertwined these games have always been. That one is supposed to complement the other in one holistic experience within the same universe.
So what am I going to build? So I'm going to build a universe, and the sort of name of the universe, or the community I'm talking about is going to be called Star Citizen. In this universe, for instance, you can sign up for your military duty, which is one of the ways to earn citizenship, and that, in essence, is playing the single-player story narrative campaign that's the Wing Commander experience, and that's the typical branching mission setup that you would have in Wing Commander. Is that particular experience we're calling Squadron 42, which was sort of what that cinematic trailer was about, and the 42nd Squadron of the Imperial Navy in this universe is sort of a legendary fighting unit. It's very much like the French Foreign Legion. In fact, that it's always in the toughest areas, trying to hold back the sort of alien hordes that are threatening humanity, and they, somehow manage to pull out in, against all the odds. And to actually be accepted into this squadron is a pretty huge deal, and sort of gives you a sort of certain level of status. It'd be like being a Navy SEAL or something. So the goal of the narrative campaign is that you fight the battles very much in a sort of Wing Commander 1, Wing Commander 2 narrative branching style, and then if you manage to succeed at the end, you'll be invited into the squadron, and then when you finish that, you'll be able to muster out, you'll have some credits in your pocket, and you'll sort of have the status of being an ex-member of the 42nd Squadron, and there's a sort of community of sort of ex-members in the universe, and then you go out and make your fortune in the universe, and we'll do another story campaign in a little bit, just much like the Wing Commander mission packs, and you could always re-up for another tour of duty. And then, so you have that, which is sort of the Wing Commander experience, and then you have sort of the Privateer Freelancer experience, which is...
There have been numerous controversies over the years with the false assumption that only one of the games were pitched. Features and scope has been altered, but not the fact that there'd be two separate experiences or two separate games. It is also important to note that as development went on, this did become a bit more muddled as to what was going on throughout the game's development. But as we can see here, the vision Chris Roberts has had since the days of Wing Commander and Freelancer is something that he very much still desired to accomplish, even decades later. The scope may have changed with features being removed or altered, but the core vision inside of Chris Roberts' head is still very much the case. Which is something I've heard confirmed from several sources, from the fanbase and even some friends that have had face-to-face meetings with Chris Roberts. A source which must sadly remain anonymous.
Part of what I'm trying to do here is, one, I'm coming back to make a game. I'm very focused on making it about PC. I feel like the games that I made in the past were obviously, at the heart, they were always PC games. I felt like, one of the things that Wing Commander and the other games I made was all about sort of pushing what you could do on the PC and sort of showing sort of the aspiration and the dream of it all. And I felt like over the last few years, especially as a player, I kind of feel like as a PC gamer, I'm kind of, underserved. I can either play ports of a console game. So, I have a console.
Another important character in the story of Squadron 42 is of course the person responsible for writing its story. This man would make an entrance in 2012, Dave Haddock, who would meet Chris Roberts during this year, and Haddock would later go on to become the lead writer and narrative director of Squadron 42. Writing lore, dialogue, and characters, Haddock would become one of the founding members of Cloud Imperium Games and has been attached to the project since. He even goes on to have his very own cameo in Star Citizen that we will see later during the course of this documentary or retrospective, whatever you want to call it. And with the unveiling of the Star Citizen and Squadron 42 project roaring to life, the mass influx of money and attention was so great that it ultimately crashed the website.
Apparently, our site is having millions of hits and is overloaded, so everyone out there, please be patient.
I think this is a little harder than I first thought.
This heavy influx of potential backers led to a partnership with Kickstarter in order to manage the sheer number of people that wished to donate or pledge to the project. The Kickstarter was of course a massive success, as crowds or even hordes of potential backers rallied to the website to pledge or donate. And here on the Kickstarter we can clearly see that Squadron 42 is proudly mentioned as a spiritual successor to the legacy of the Wing Commander series. So to reiterate, Squadron 42 is the single-player element and the game in the Star Citizen universe and was always planned alongside its sister game, which is the MMO component.
At ease, pilots. It's been a difficult campaign, but we're winning this thing, thanks to your efforts. Stretch goals are on the run, and it won't be much longer. We have 2 big targets left. 6,000 clicks out. Alpha Wing, I'll be needing you to hit Kickstarter. Beta Wing, you'll be swarming the RSI pledge site. We need all of you. Tell your family. Tell your friends. Tell your pets if that's what it takes. Offer them upgrades, extra ships, whole new tiers, whatever gets us over the top. We have 1 week left. If we can defeat these 2, then the war is won. We lost a lot of good web designers and artists getting this far. Don't let that be in vain. So man your ships, and let's teach these stretch goals what it means to mess with Squadron 42. For the Empire, for the PC, for the space sim.
At the end of the crowdfunding campaign on November 19th, 2012, Star Citizen and Squadron 42 had raised an astonishing, for the time, $6.2 million in crowdfunding, with $2.1 million being raised on the Kickstarter and $4.1 million being raised on the RSI website. With this new funding in their back pockets, the future looked bright for the space sim community and Cloud Imperium Games, as they proudly headed towards the next year. And with only 2 years until release, what could go wrong? Towards the end of 2012, but mostly in 2013, it is also important to mention that during the course of Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, there would be several behind-the-scenes shows. The first one of these shows would be pioneered and spearheaded by Eric Wingman Peterson, who created a series called Wingman's Hangar.
The show's beginning, how it started. I mean, initially, we did a live stream, Chris, myself, Sandy, Martin, and some others, and Dave Swafford, and we're doing the 24-hour live stream in a friend of ours' office to launch this thing, and I got kind of bored with just being in there with the group and listening to people talk, and so I was like, well, I'm just gonna go out and start my own channel. So I went out and grabbed a Ustream channel and started doing chair races and how quick I could go and touch Chris in the ear and run back, and the fans were actually timing the times and stuff. And so
some other people were getting into that too. Sandy was jumping in.
Yeah, she was doing this parrot thing, and they started calling her my parrot on my shoulder. So she would come out there. It was just kind of fun. And then we went to dinner and had a few libations and it got a little wild. We had Angry Billy on there for a while. So anyway, that's kind of how how it started. Chris saw that and saw the reaction of people and said, remember he said you guys should do a weekly hour show, and I was like.
With Eric, we'd get to take a peek behind the curtain of the day-to-day at CIG and be given information in a rather casual and fun format. This, of course, helped to sell CIG's open development style, and it would be met positively by fans. It is important to mention this, as you will see certain figures appear then disappear, and this will be stated clearly whenever the beginning of a new show begins to avoid confusion. In 2013, a man known very well by the Wing Commander fan community, Ben Loaf, yes really, Lesnick, would become one of CIG's first employees in 2013. And his impact on the games, especially in their early years, was instrumental in the success of the crowdfunding campaign. Ben had corresponded with Chris Roberts since the 90s, and the contact had only increased over the years, as Ben was running the largest Wing Commander fan website, Wing Commander Combat Information Center, a mouthful to be sure. He would come up with the concept sales of ships, getting into the nitty-gritty details of each ship so that players could fall in love with them. He helped Chris Roberts and, per extension, Cloud Imperium Games to understand how the fan community around him worked.
We kind of corresponded ever since. Whenever he would have wanted to bring back Space Sims or Wing Commander, there's going to be a Wing Commander TV show, there's going to be a GameCube game, there's a lot of these ideas. I would always come back and he would ask me for what the community is thinking.
And he thusly became Director of Community Engagement and Content Strategy, as well as Master of Ships.
It's nice because there's still, as big as we are, there's still that small company feel. I mean, I think you could go in, if you had some great idea or were worried about something, you could go and talk to Chris Roberts just like I could. And he would listen to you as well. So it's.
And it could be said in one way that without him, the longevity of the project would have been uncertain without his insight and willingness to engage with the community, which he still does to this very day. As seen previously during the course of the reveal trailer for Squadron 42 and Star Citizen, the Vandal would become the main antagonist species for the Star Citizen universe. More species would of course also be added, like the Tavarin, Banu, Xi'an, and the Cathag. But for the purposes of Squadron 42, the as stated antagonist species would become the Vandal. As Squadron wears its legacy on its sleeve, it's not surprising to find out that the Vandal takes some inspiration, perhaps not in terms of appearance, but behaviorally, from the Kilrathi. The Kilrathi are of course the antagonist species of the Wing Commander universe. But the difference would be, instead of a great empire, the Vandal would instead take the form of migrating clans, seemingly only made up exclusively by males, which could indicate the female Vandal are hidden somewhere deep within Vandal space. Who knows of what wondrous mysteries we shall solve during the course of the games. The original intention, as stated by Chris Roberts, is that Squadron 42 would serve as a tutorial for the player to earn their wings by training and fighting in the single-player campaign. You would enroll in the United Empire of Earth's Navy as a civilian, then serve during your tour of duty and eventually leave the military as a full citizen. which would carry over into Star Citizen. It appears the intention was that all of this would take place within the same game at the time, with separate menu options to enter the persistent universe or the single-player campaign. Though it is important to note that they'd still share assets and run on the same engine, so separate but the same. Kind of. It was also intended to feature a co-op mode, but that has since appeared to have been completely scrapped, with the smaller campaign of earning your wings being supplanted by a far grander triple or quadruple A experience. This all-new cinematic and narrative experience would only expand further as the scope of both Star Citizen and Squadron 42 changed, due to the technologies they were developing and the new possibilities the large amount of funding they had secured enabled. These new technologies and further developments to the game's engines would later enable them to move on from the previous loading screens and landing zones to wholly simulated planets with seamless transitions from space, atmosphere to surface, which we will cover more later. It is also important to mention the community polls, but they will also be covered a little bit later, but also what occurred as a result of the increase in funding. At the time, the amount of funding pouring in became a bit of a feedback loop, meaning that as more money came in, the more stuff would be added to the game. People kept giving them more money, which meant more stuff would be put in the game and so on. So the question is, when would this stop? Cloud Imperium games would undergo fast expansion as crowdfunding money kept pouring in. Chris Roberts would leverage his industry connections to work together with a previous colleague and his company called Void Alpha, but this would not be the only company that CIG hired to outsource development to. Cloud Imperium would also find itself working with Armory, Behavior Interactive, and probably the most important company, Turbulent, which would go on to be instrumental in the story of Star Citizen and Squadron 42 due to their work on the RSI website. Turbulent would also go on to later be acquired by CIG in July of 2023. But there was a final company that they outsourced development to, namely CGBot in Mexico, which will briefly become perhaps not important, but a little bit funny later. 2013 would also breathe new life into the project with a not perhaps new concept, but a brilliant one. The Citizencon, an event where the developers could come on stage alongside Chris Roberts himself to discuss the status and future plans for the game live whilst interacting with the community. At the tail end of Citizencon in 2013, it would finally be revealed that Cloud Imperium Games Manchester had started its formation, and it would of course be headed by none other than Aaron Roberts, being joined by several former colleagues across several games, adding to Cloud Imperium's experience and perhaps camaraderie. Cloud Imperium Manchester would also come to be known as Foundry 42 due to its main focus being on Squadron 42. I will not play the live audio at its original volume for, put frankly, the cringe levels reached dangerous levels during this segment.
Mission Control, do you read me? Mission Control, do you read me? This is Commander Roberts. Station Command, Boundary 42. Come in.
This is Mission Control. Receiving you, Commander.
The Eagle has landed. The Eagle has landed. Strike Recon Team is online.
Acknowledged, Commander. Transmit identification data now.
Transmitting now.
Confirmed, Commander. Personnel validated. Strike team assembled. Mission is a go. I repeat, mission is a go. Execute Executive Order Squadron 42. Good hunting, Commander.
Thanks, Control. Good to be back.
One can, however, surmise that this is how the Roberts brothers used to play together when growing up. In spite of the rambunctious cringe that was witnessed during the course of the first Citizencon, or the technical difficulties and the violence.
Did you hear that? Are you insane? Stop attacking! Stop! Oh dear! I seem to be wounded, but I can keep going.
The event overflowed with nerd enthusiasm. It was made quite clear to the community that these developers loved what they were doing, and they were more than happy to share an insight to their work. Citizencon was ultimately a very successful event to celebrate the development of both Star Citizen and Squadron 42, a tradition that continues to this day. And with the success of Citizencon, the size of the community and funding would only continue to grow.
You've got mail.
Letters from the Chairman was a concept introduced by CIG where Chris Roberts would write the eponymous letters upon having reached the next million in funding on the stretch goal counter, which the project would of course become infamous for. This hype train allowed them to smash ceiling after ceiling, but due to the shifting nature of the game, plenty of these stretch goals would find themselves falling on the wayside. In November of 2013, a letter from the Chairman was posted on the 22nd of November, celebrating the 29th million mark having been reached in the game's funding. This level of funding enabled them to further increase the scope of Squadron 42, by instead of merely opening with a linear training mission, it would instead start with an epic space battle. This, of course, being the first ever mention of the prologue space battle we'd come to see in later years during leaks, trailers, and eventually a live gameplay reveal. Hark, gentlemen, we have finally arrived at the first delivery date of Star Citizen and Squadron 42, 2014. But of course, due to the increased crowdfunding and the shifting scope of the game as a result, it was delayed, which was entirely expected by the community. But hey, it's only a year away. 2014 would mark the end of Wingman's hangar, which also included the departure of the wingman himself, Eric Wingman Peterson. He stepped down because he didn't want to move from Texas to California, which is perfectly understandable, as at the time CIG was consolidating leadership at their Santa Monica studio to reduce Chris's travel between studios. But yes, it was the end of the Wingman's tenure, and in its stead a new show would arise instead, Around the Verse, which would be hosted by Sandy Gardner and Ben Lesnick instead, following the same sort of format as Wingman's with a somewhat higher production quality. Sandy was, of course, a choice because she wasn't exactly too popular at the time either, due to making such public statements as this.
I'm always very mindful of the community. For example, I flew to Manchester. I got this super cheap ticket to Manchester. And Chris was like, why didn't you fly business? And I said, well, I don't know. I saw this $900 ticket and I thought, well, I'll just fly economy because I don't want the fans thinking. And he's like, well, fans don't even know. He goes, you gotta like be comfortable. I said, yeah, but you know, I think...
I find it important to add after playing that clip that this reflects worse on Chris more so than it does on Sandy, but this is how she chose to completely willingly, during an interview, express herself. Oh dear. But now I find it a good time to discuss the video concept that would cause much more joy and dissatisfaction in the community. The concept was simple. As a part of Wingman's hangar, every week Chris would answer 10 questions sent in by the community. This would allow Chris to more easily speak to the community in bite-sized videos, so the community would not have to wait until a Citizencon, Gamescom, or PAX event, or letter from the chairman for him to speak. But this would also cause a significant amount of problems for CIG, for you see, Chris Roberts is a visionary, and he has a very wild imagination. This would mean he would give very broad and in-depth answers to the questions the community had posed, giving confidence that many of these things that they wanted to see in the game would happen, only to then find out that in many cases it is the intention, but no work has actually gone towards this feature or content, and it's merely Chris speculating and dreaming what he'd also like to see.
So next question comes from Valarian, who asks, will you be able to hail NPC ships and threaten them to drop their cargo on the off chance it will save their ship? If so, will there be a randomly generated personality for NPCs, some that fight, flee to the nearest authority, or cows that will drop their cargo and run? Yeah, the short answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, my goal actually is for the NPCs in the game to sort of feel and appear much like real people. So in some ways, I almost sort of feel like until you get up close, I kind of don't want the players to really even know that it's an NPC or a player. It could be an NPC or it could be a player. And therefore, the NPCs are already designing a bunch of behavior for them, and part of their plan is to sort of have sort of kind of human-like responses, like preserve their own life or do all that kind of stuff. So I would definitely say that you will be able to say, give us your cargo, or pay the consequences. And some people will fight you, and some people will just surrender the cargo and get out of there.
This series should instead have been named 10 Unforced Errors, and it would eventually lead to the end of 10 for the chairman, as Chris's answers caused more issues than it brought confidence to the community. It would also cause issues from outsiders looking in, which would only exacerbate the accusations of vaporware, fraud, and scam.
Okay, so Bess asks, is the plan to release Squadron 42 and the Persistent Universe at the same time, or will one come out before the other? Good question. I mean, from our standpoint, I think we want to give you Squadron 42, or at least part of it, before the Persistent Universe is finished, so to speak. And we're kind of toying around with how we can do this with Squadron 42 in a way that sort of falls into the methodology we're using and sort of development methodology, because I think giving you the whole Squadron 42 is just an alpha may not work as well, because it's a story, so it needs to be fairly polished as far as that goes. So one of our thoughts is to take Squadron 42 and sort of release it episodically. So before the game is fully finished, where you play the first X number of missions that are nice and well done and polished, and then the next X number of missions a month later, and so on until you've worked your way through Squadron 42, which would lead you up to the sort of beta of the Persistent Universe. So that's currently our thinking. It's still in process right now, but we'll see. But when the game is finished properly, obviously Squadron 42 and Persistent Universe, Star Citizen would all be sort of in as part of the package. Okay, that's it. That's the last of our 10 questions and our first 10 from the chairman. So thanks for sitting with me. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much.
So even though it was, in a way, a loss for the players, it was ultimately the right choice for everyone's sanity and the longevity of the games. 10 for the Chairman had a decent run, with a total of 88 episodes from December 2013 until a final episode on March 15, 2017. The show would not be replaced by anything Chris-related. Chris would allege, however, that he believed the series had gotten stale and that he wanted to do something fresh. Now gagged, Chris would mostly thereon only be speaking at events such as Gamescom or Citizencon, and this is the state he's been left in since. 2013 and 2014 would also be the years of a few landmark choices that were put in the hands of the community, which consequences echo until this very day. It was of course intended for Squadron 42 and Star Citizen to be delivered in 2014, but as the funding kept increasing, it meant that the scope could also increase, offering the players more features and content that they'd eventually be able to enjoy. As Chris Roberts stated in 2013, his dream was to make the best damn space sim. So in 2013, a vote was held if they should keep the crowdfunding counter going after they reached their goal. 87% of the backers taking part in the vote voted yes. 2014 would also have its own highly controversial vote with the question, should we continue to offer stretch goals, which under the accusations of scope creep would only have 57% of backers that voting yes. According to this post found on the Refundian Reddit, a not always charitable page towards CIG or Star Citizen, it is still highly relevant with the numbers it comes included with. For what could likely be considered the biggest part of the controversy is the number of backers that actually were aware of this vote. For the 2013 vote, according to the post, there were only 21,076 votes cast, with a grand total of 179,000 alpha backers. That is only 8% of backers, and with 88% voting yes, however, it was a landslide victory. The vote in 2014 was even more controversial when the community was asked again if they should continue to offer stretch goals, with only 55% voting yes, with only 34,590 alpha backers voting, meaning only 14% of paying backers actually voted. So yes, the community did vote to continue to increase the scope. So the community takes part of the blame that Squadron 42's and Star Citizen scope kept increasing. At the same time, however, CIG would assure that this could all be done within a reasonable time frame, as in Chris Roberts' own words, they kept accelerating. But it is also fair at the same time to point out that, sure, the community did vote to increase the scope, but due to the tiny portion of people that actually voted, it could be argued that it was only the absolute diehards that got the chance to vote. The people that backed, forgot about it, and were waiting for the previous version of the games they were promised weren't perhaps properly informed about this. So at that point, it is almost a given that of course, the fans would want more game for their money. But this would of course come with unforeseen consequences later on. If any country only had a turnout of 14% for a vote, it'd be considered farcical. But now we arrive at Citizencon 2014. Mic issues appear to be something that had haunted CIG in their early years, as they struggled to maintain consistent audio quality and due to a high-pitched noise in the background.
We've done Arena Commander, we've done Broken Moon,
making it hard to play some of these very important clips. But they are important and thusly they must be played. So, sorry for your ears if it, hurts. 2014 would also mark our first introduction to one of the early versions of the Archon station, which we'd see improved upon over the years. But this clip offers the most comprehensive early viewing of the size and scale of the station.
What we've accomplished this year, I'm personally most proud of getting levels out to you guys. I mean, these levels are so big. So what we're showing now is Shubin's facility called Archon. Now Shubin Interstellar is a corporation, a mining corporation. The facility that you can see is the Archon. Now this thing is big, like 6 kilometers big. And currently it's in its grey box phase. So you're seeing full mesh detail, no textures or shaders. Just the physical act of making these levels was initially so hard because the CryEngine was custom built for small environments. And we had to render big space scenes. That's a big achievement.
According to Aaron Roberts, as you can hear during this clip, the intention was to release the game in 2015.
Going forward, loads to do. The big one for us is Squadron 42. We're looking to have the vertical slice working for the end of this year, and then of course next year we plan to release the first chapter of Squadron 42 for you guys.
It appears that what they mean by chapter is not the game's first mission, but the first game in the Squadron 42 series. So at this time, the intended release very much appears to have been 2015. But that would of course change quite quickly. But even as late as November 3rd, 2014, Chris Roberts would reiterate a 2015 release date at PAX Australia's fan event. This fan event would even feature a rare Chris Roberts F-bomb. We truly live in the greatest timeline. This was merely included for a short bit of fun.
I'm pretty sure I killed you since I put a bunch of missiles into you.
To those asking in the stream, Chris is flying the Avenger.
Yeah, it's the unbalanced Avenger too.
He is a gamer. Handsome Roberts wins again. One thing that Squadron 42 has become famous for, or perhaps even infamous for, is the heavy reliance and use of big actor name recognition to promote the game. And of course, this is a conscious choice to add further to the feeling of the game being a cinematic experience. That you as the player are in essence playing a role in a movie. And what do we find in movies? Big name actors, depending on the movie. So in 2015, we'd start being introduced to several of the actors that had signed themselves onto the project. Mark Hamill is of course famous for his roles as Luke Skywalker and his brilliant work as a voice actor, from the Joker to Fire Lord Ozai to Art in Invincible. He had of course worked with Chris Roberts previously on the Wing Commander series and seemed quite enthusiastic about returning to work with Chris. And as far as I was able to discern, it appears that he took this on as a bit of a passion project, which he said in his own words.
It's just been as much fun as I imagined it would be. I really had such a great time working on Wing Commander with Chris, and the fond memories remain, but I never in a million years thought that the opportunity would present itself again. And when he asked me to do it, he's so brilliant. I didn't need a script. I immediately said, of course, I can't wait. Of course, your agent says, you didn't tell him that, did you? I mean, play hard to get, for God's sakes. No, I didn't have to think twice. It was just a no-brainer.
This would at the same time also further add faith to the project that it was not just some vaporware, but an actual product that was soon to arrive. And it further cemented the fact that Squadron 42 is the spiritual successor to Wing Commander by having its former main character, in a way, be our mentor. Instead of this time playing Christopher Maverick Blair, he'd now instead be known as Steve Old Man Colton. Gary Oldman on the surface appears to be the biggest and most important name attached to the project, but I'd argue that it's still Mark Hamill. Gary Oldman is of course one of the greatest actors of his time and has been seen across several movies and franchises, big and small. Him signing onto the project of course being fantastic not because of his talent, but also for the marketing boon that he'd bring. Oldman would take on the role as Admiral Ernst Bishop, one of the series' main protagonists. ? Andy Serkis and his company, the Imaginarium, have been heavily involved in the project due to Serkis's and the Imaginarium being one of the foremost motion capture studios in the world, allowing CIG to in essence do motion capture with one of its true pioneers. Serkis plays the main antagonist of the series, Thule Okure. Thule OK. John Rhys-Davies also worked on the Wing Commander series with Roberts and Hamill, and is of course more than famous, having been in movie series such as Indiana Jones and of course having played Gimli in Lord of the Rings, the greatest film trilogy of all time, and I will die on that hill. A true hot take, I know. He plays Randall Graves, an old veteran that had previously served with Mark Hamill's character. He also wears a badge of particular importance to the writer of this script, for he carries the badge of the Pegasus, a ship that has perhaps been forgotten by CIG, but one must hope and cope that it will return to us one day. Gillian Anderson, of course, also appears in Squadron 42. She is, of course, famous for her work on The X-Files and becomes an early mentor to the player character, taking on the role as Captain McLaren, whose fate appears uncertain after the 2024 gameplay reveal that we shall, of course, cover later. The protagonist, or the player character, would be voiced by Alex Wilton Reagan, who voices the female character, and Ian Duncan, who voices the male character. Oh, of course, my apologies. Body Type 1 and 2 respectively. And there are of course several more actors that we'd see come to attach themselves to the project over the course of its development, such as Henry Cavill, Mark Strong, Ben Mendelsohn, Rona Mitra, Jack Houston, Sophie Wu, Danny Houston, and Liam Cunningham, and of course, me. And with this, enthusiasm and confidence was strengthened that these individuals would attach themselves to the project, further legitimizing it, perhaps even raising some eyebrows in the press as to the validity of this project. In 2015, a face not previously unknown to the community would finally go from being a mere fan to contracted animator to a full CIG employee. From submitting fan questions to appearing at the 2014 Holiday Livestream, it was a consequential hiring indeed.
Oh, we got a video from Disco Lando.
Good morning, Wingman. This is Lando. Disco Lando. And I have a question about multiplayer integration in the Hangar and Dogfighting Alpha. Multiplayer integration? You know I do. Anyway, so far the Hangar Alpha has been a single-player experience. Will the initial version of the Dogfighter Alpha be single-player as well? I remember a time when Disco Lando changed dates 3 times in the same evening, and he ended up home alone with a single-player experience.
I don't even. I know.
It's hard to remember what he asks.
I think it was about the single player experience.
It was the single player, multiplayer. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg, or the multiplayer, or the hangar, or the dogfighting? But man, that guy.
Disco Lando is of course also known better by the community by his real name, Jared Huckabee. Jared would go on from being a cringe-inducing fan to instead becoming a cringe-inducing community manager. He knows in his heart of hearts that he earned that one.
All right, that's cool. Also, everybody's got food. Do I have food here? Oh, somebody's supposed to save me pizza. All right, so we got... Oh, you guys saved me a lot of pizza. Let's see, there's like 3 different kinds of pizza here. What if we just combine them into like a challenger situation here? That's a Citizencon throwback if you're not familiar with it.
We're all a little bit cringe here, aren't we? His work on the project as its face since the put-in cornering of Chris Roberts has been instrumental to its success. He is, in essence, CIG's face towards the community. He carries the unenviable job of trying to communicate with the frothing hordes of space sim enthusiasts, screeching at every alteration to the game. Through eyewitness accounts of persons interviewed for this project, it can be discerned that by those that have directly interacted in meetings and casually spoken to Jared, he is apparently quite a nice guy. But as stated, his work, though sometimes marked as controversial, has been important to the game's success, as he has continued to work at CIG until the present day. As the $41 million goal was reached, Star Citizen and Squadron 42 would allow for a procedural generation research and development team to be formed. This team would be made up by several former CryTek employees. That, alongside many other CryTek employee acquisitions, would definitely not lead to any tensions in the future between the flourishing Cloud Imperium games and the struggling CryTek. Marco Corbetta was one of these former CryTek employees that had made the move over to Foundry 42 Frankfurt. Corbetta was one of the major acquisitions from CryTek to CIG, alongside many other procedural generation experts. Together with his team, he'd quickly be able to develop early prototypes for PlanetTech. Procedural planets had previously only been promised as a post-launch feature in Star Citizen, but Corbetta insisted he could work and develop it in his spare time. This work would culminate in the video From Pupil to Planet, and PlanetTech V1 would later be demoed in 2016 to the public. But through Corbetta's hard work and enthusiasm alongside his team, the game was revolutionized. It is hard to understate the effect that this short video would have on the project. This marked the first public unveiling of the procedural PlanetTech that would allow seamless transitions from space to surface, with nearly completely free traversal across the surfaces of planetary bodies and space. This breakthrough in technology would again change the scope of Squadron 42 and Star Citizen in its entirety, with Squadron 42's and Star Citizen's game worlds now being able to be massively expanded, allowing the players far more freedom than ever before. It would also mean that planets would no longer only have a handful of points of interest where the players could actually land, so once this tech would be in the players' hands, they'd be able to land wherever they pleased, whenever they pleased, for the most part. And this tech is breathtaking to this day. In many a game's development, especially the longer they are being developed, are likelier and likelier over time to be struck by an internal or external leak. Which one of the most famous is of course the Half-Life 2 beta leak that severely affected Valve at the time. And if a studio on the level of Valve was not immune to a leak, neither would a studio like CIG be. So 2015 would mark the first major leak of assets where the community got its first look at several ships developed for Squadron 42. All of these ships have already been seen by the community in their updated format, but I will state now that this is a leak, and if you wish to avoid these, not really spoilers, then skip to this timestamp. You will be given 5 seconds to choose. The leak, as previously stated, features plenty of ships from Squadron 42. A lot are, however, the older design language for the Vandal ships, so they are not entirely relevant anymore. A few of the hulls that we can see, like the Idris, the Kingship, and the Bengal Carrier, are of course mostly matching their current appearance. It had also marked the first appearance of the human answer to a Kingship, the Retribution, a massive vessel that is under construction during the course of Squadron. And how much do you think that one will cost, Odin boys? Citizencon in 2015 would feature a second confirmation that the prologue to the game had changed and had been replaced with a massive space battle. They would also double down on showcasing the amount of new talent which had been acquired for Squadron, with the debut of Gary Oldman as Admiral Ernst Bishop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this emergency session is called to order. Admiral Bishop, you have the floor.
For 200 years, we have battled the Vandal. We have caught these attacks, raids, or skirmishes or incursions. But I am here to tell you that we are at war. Tiber, Orion, Caliban, Virgil, once human systems all but abandoned in the face of the enemy. The Vandal are at our gates, weapons bared while we hide and cower, retreating as they burn and decimate everything around us. We cannot let the tragedy of Vega happen again. We cannot give the Vandal any more ground. To defend this empire, we must attack. And we have to be committed to that attack, whatever the cost may be. We have to rebuild our fleet. We have to use the power of human innovation to reclaim these so-called red systems and strike back at the enemy. This will not be an easy fight. It will cost us in resources, in credits, in lives. Well, some of you may be asking why undertake such a thing, and I can tell you in one word. Victory! For if there's one thing the Vandal has taught us, it's that without victory, there can be no survival!
This would mark a landmark in the development of Squadron 42, featuring a high level of fidelity during the cinematic, which interestingly led to many arguments across the comments and the internet in general, namely if the graphics were considered good enough or if Gary Oldman's performance really was as spectacular as CIG and fans would laud it as. During the shooting of the speech, Sandy Gardner stated the following.
I heard that you were just rehearsing and like everybody stopped and everybody's jaw just dropped and went,
Ultimately, however, it was a smash hit to those that mattered. That, of course, being the fans who still enjoy the speech and performance to this day. But the Oldman's performance would not be the only one that would be witnessed at Citizencon in 2015. The community would finally be seeing several other actors in Star Citizen and meeting a few of the characters in the game. That, of course, being Morrow and his Morrow Tour.
Oh, hey!
It is supposed to be an optional path the player can choose to take if they wish to further familiarize themselves with the UEEN Stanton, an Idris frigate. This tour would mark the first in-engine appearance of the Idris frigate with a full interior officially, it having previously been leaked in white box, showing a remarkable leap in progress with their technology that they had this fully realized. Even though the Idris would be showcased several times and even be included in Star Citizen as a boss battle, it would take several years for the ship to finally be put into players' hands. This tour also further showcases the player's ability to choose how they interact with the characters around them. Squadron 42 is supposed to feature a highly detailed system where you as the player through your actions have an effect on the characters you do or do not interact with. Meaning that if you start a conversation with a character, then for whatever reason choose not to do what they like or just walk away mid-conversation, they are not liable to like you. But this will be discussed further along in the documentary.
At ease. Now, Captain White likes to meet everybody who comes aboard his ship, but I wanted to have a quick word first. So why don't you take a seat? Little history lesson. Sealed in 2872, the Stanton is an Aegeus Idris class frigate. She served with the 351st Battle Group for almost 6 decades, before transferring to the 87th Battle Group 10 years ago. In our last 2 assignments, we've gone from rescue and disaster relief in Ferron to perimeter sweeps along the Jean front. We handle all sorts of theatres, all sorts of situations. Now, some people have got big dreams of thrashing duel out with Bishop and think a post like this isn't worth their time, that this is a joke assignment. So I tell every new transfer this only once. We may be a small crew, but the work we do matters. And if you don't respect that, I'll make sure you spend your career scrubbing decks in the darkest corner of the Empire.
So, just to talk a little bit about Squadron 42, I would put it up next, just as a standalone project, next to any AAA, big publisher, big budget game. I am 100% confident that it can go toe-to-toe with any of those games and, come out on top. I wanted to sort of show you the difference between, okay, so this is Outlander, this actually is the Outlander script, but it's 116 pages, so this is like a normal film script you normally shoot. And then, this is essentially what Wing 3 was, Heart of the Tiger. As you can see, it's a lot thicker because you have obviously a lot more options. And then this was Wing 4, which was a little longer than Wing 3, but not significantly. I think it was about 411 pages versus 324. And then, that's what we shot for Squadron 42. And that's all enabled by you guys. So, I don't know if I can do like that, bam. Sorry Dave, I should have picked that up. But yeah, no, so there's going to be a massive amount of game.
Which is obviously why it's going to take a little longer than we originally thought, but
I find it important to state that just because it is long does not guarantee that it is good. Isn't that right, Herring? Hark, everyone, for the year of release is soon upon you. The phone is ringing. Will you so boldly go into that dark night and answer the call? Upon the completion of 2015's Citizencon, a new page would appear on the RSI website featuring Gary Oldman's speech alongside the tagline, "Answer the Call." This being the official beginning of the marketing for Squadron 42 as they strove towards a 2016 release date, meaning that the game had sadly been delayed by 2 years, which of course was not unheard of when it comes to a Chris Roberts project. So overall, 2 years was not a bad overshoot, right?
But as I made a pledge quite a few years ago when I said we kept on raising money, I said I'm going to take the money we raise and I'm going to put it back into the project, and we're going to make the project bigger and better, which is true for Squadron 42 and true for Star Citizen.
Around the Verse would not only feature impressive visuals, but it would also feature plenty of information and interviews from the developers, writers, and community input. Sometimes it even features some neat sketches. The focus of this documentary/retrospective is of course Squadron 42. But if you want a more in-depth look at how CIG and Star Citizen developed, Around the Verse is an excellent resource that is featured in an entire playlist. Viewer beware, it features some of the worst music known to mankind. During the course of Around the Verse, the community would be treated to several sneak peeks into Star Citizen, but even more sneakily into Squadron 42. The scale and quality of Around the Verse would only increase as Squadron 42 appeared to near completion, with some truly stunning visuals, both according to today's standards and at the time, alongside showcases of the scale of some of the ships that would be featured in the game.
Just as a little highlight for you guys, we're going to take a brief look at the Bengal. It's the first ship that Chris revealed for Squadron 42. It's a big beast. We've done extensive work on the hangar and the exterior. To give you an idea of the scale of the Bengal, you can fit an Idris inside of the Bengal's hangar, pretty much. You can't quite fly it in, but it's pretty close. So it's a huge undertaking. It requires a lot of investigation into different lighting techniques, different construction techniques, different meshing techniques. Essentially, it's just one big bowl of soup that we need to work out how we're going to first of all fit it in memory, make it render, and make it fly. So it's never been done before in any game, and that's the challenge that we're approaching here. So in total in the Bengal, and this isn't just a hangar, we've got a total of 7 artists working on the Bengal at the moment. They kicked off about, beginning of the year. Before that, we were kind of R&Ding how we're going to approach it efficiently. We got Jay, who's been heading up the hangar process for us. We've got Ian, who's been working with Jay, and we've got Robin as well, who's looking at the bridge. And then we go to exterior work, which is another challenge in itself. So we've got Phil, our senior artist, working up. He's just come off the Starfarer, so to give you an idea of the quality that we're going to be pushing there. And when you approach making kind of ships over a kilometre in scale, the construction technique in 3D completely changes. We can model everything up to a certain extent, but then you have to start relying on kind of clever shader techniques to get that sense of scale on massive volumes and make the overall aesthetic of the ship work with those construction techniques. And as you can see from this kind of brief preview of the exterior, it's come along really well. All the guys are up for the challenge. When we started on it, it was just a lot of scratching heads, a lot of, oh my God, what are we going to do? I mean, the exterior alone has like 90 turrets and missile launchers, something along that off the top of my head. There's huge turrets. One of the turrets on the exterior is the size, it's slightly smaller than Idris, basically. You put a Gladius next to it, it just dwarfs it with this cannon. It's brilliant. But then we've got all the other kind of components on the exterior, which add up to a significant amount of data to push around at one time. So you have to be very kind of careful how you construct that. When you start to see other ships within the environment and characters walking around in that environment, you get a full sense of scale. As I mentioned, it's massive. This comes with its own set of challenges for kind of how much kind of geometry we can render. In this case, the scale of probably 3 or 4 battlefield maps and floating it around and everything's functional. And you can walk it around in space. That's never been done before. We're up for the challenge. We're doing it. It is a challenge. Nothing in life is easy in this industry, but I'm fairly confident we're about sort of 70% of the way there now. Once all that kind of underlying tech comes on board, it will work. As you can see, it's looking beautiful. So, yeah, that's the challenge that we've got for the next, should we say, 3 months. I'd estimate it'll be done. Yeah.
We will not only see an increase in quality, but also more in-depth looks into ships and systems that were being developed for the games. And these are, of course, some of the videos that we will take a look at, being slightly cut down for time, but as most of the community haven't seen these videos, it is important to be caught up. The community was happy. It was waiting and was finally in the year 2016 when the already 2-year delayed game would be released.
One year ago, our lives were shattered. But we have not forgotten. United in the face of the Vandal threat, we have dedicated ourselves to creating the universe we have always wanted. A safe and secure UEE for all. Thanks to your continued support in the sale of war bonds, the UEE is proud to announce the Militia Mobilization Initiative, authorizing the sale of certain military-grade ships to ensure that civilian militias are properly equipped to defend the Empire in times of need. We will ensure a brighter future for our children. At the forefront of that effort is RSI's newest ship, the Polaris. Combining devastating firepower and searing speed, the Polaris-class corvette is effective against a wide variety of aggressors and scenarios, from delivering humanitarian aid to tactical operations. The Polaris's ability will make it an essential part of any fleet for years to come. But the Polaris is only the tip of the spear for this grand initiative. A full line of other ships are now available for a limited time. And to support faster mobilization and operational effectiveness, fleet formations are being offered in discounted, pre-designed ship teams. So stand in solidarity with the brave men and women who put their lives on the line, and join them in protecting the dream that is the UEE. Answer the call today.
But at Citizencon 2016, they would again face the brick wall of disappointment.
And we have the Subsumption, which is fully systemic AI, sort of next generation stuff, created by the genius mind of Tony Zurvek, wherever he is. I don't know, he's hiding out somewhere here. And the big AI team behind it, led by Francesco Riccucci and his guys that are implementing most of it, and the designers that are doing it. But it's going to allow for being, say, on a whatever ship you're serving on, say the Idris or a Bengal, and the crew's going about their day, having schedules, doing lots of different things, fixing things. It's going to be very cool. We are currently taking one of the chapters of the story all the way to what we would consider final shipping quality.
The idea would be to flush out all the technical integration and polish issues you would get with that. And that was actually, I gave an interview, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, probably spoke too soon, and it's saying, we're hoping to show you a Squadron 42 mission, and we're not quite there yet. So we got very close. The team worked really hard, but we don't want to show it until we say, this is what it's going to be like in the final game with all the polish. And for our standpoint, we don't want to show something too early on Squadron 42. We want to show the final stuff. So I know that's a bit of a bummer, but it's important because I think Squadron 42 itself is going to be in a fantastic experience. But there is, work in progress. Star Citizen, yes, I think work in progress on Squadron 42. I don't really want to do because I am accused of being a bit of a perfectionist, but it does need to be a great experience.
And here, of course, we arrive at the issue of using the weasel words, not quite, and we only have to do this, and it's done.
And we have Subsumption, which is fully systemic AI, sort of next generation stuff, created by the genius mind of Tony Zurvek, wherever he is. I don't know, he's hiding out somewhere here. We have some key things still left. So Subsumption is still the major one that we're doing just because it's this whole new thing that we're doing, and we need to continue to work on the pathfinding because it's not just pathfinding like you would in traditional game.
This would of course leave fans frustrated and detractors joyful. In spite of the growing frustration amongst fans and the continued derision from outsiders, the community would only continue to grow thanks to Star Citizen, and they'd remain steeled in their beliefs that the project would succeed. This would naturally contribute to the accusations of a cult-like behavior among Star Citizen and Squadron 42 fans, which was not helped by the constantly ticking up funding meter. News outlets could not wait to post the next X 100 million raised with no end in sight article with no research into the project, only to harvest clicks. Of course, Chris Roberts brought this upon himself by expressing himself as he did, alongside the constantly shifting release windows and dates. Derision and fervor would only increase as time went on, and it would also mark the start of the only 2 years away meme, where Squadron 42 was delayed from 2014 to 2016, and now from 2016 to 2018.
Always two there are. No more, no less.
To bookend the year, in December of 2016, the community would be treated with an all-new cinematic trailer or revealing of the Driller. The Driller is a Vandal Capital-class ship, and it would be shown for the first time to the public in this stunning cinematic, showing the redesigned Vandal species alongside the new design language.
Leadpipe asks, have you as the community team been able to play through a single mission on Squadron 42 yet? I have been able to, but I have chosen not to.
I have played through every mission because I come from QA and it was my job to do so.
Yeah.
An epic space opera is of course naught without its music. Thusly, a series of composers have been brought on for both Star Citizen and Squadron 42. But the dust would eventually settle on two major composers for the project, which we will cover now. Pedro Macedo Camacho is of course well known in the Star Citizen community for composing its main theme and several beautiful tracks such as the highly praised Bloom theme. Pedro's main focus does, however, appear to mostly have been with Star Citizen, with of course some overlap with Squadron 42's main composer. Jeff. My name's Jeff. Jeff Sinelli is probably lesser known within the overall community, as he is mainly focused on composing music for Squadron 42. His music is only heard usually when Squadron content is featured, making it a sadly rare treat to hear. His work is, however, no less important and will most likely become just as iconic as the works of Pedro. It could be assumed that he works closely with Pedro to maintain the same musical DNA as each other, so there is some consistency in between the music, but that is mostly me guessing.
Greetings, citizens. I'm composer Jeff Zanelli. I wrote the music for Squadron 42, and I want to talk to you about something very close to my heart. This is the soundtrack album. And I just want to go over a few highlights. First piece I wrote for Squadron 42 is called Coil Commanders. Actually, my nickname in college. That's where I got that. And I hope you like saxophones. We have another one, Admiral Bishop's Tax Return. You're not going to believe when you find this part in game what's actually going on in this story. It's there's a lot of money laundering subplots and lots of paperwork and stuff in the game, and so I wanted to make sure there was like a paperwork theme.
Another year, another load of Around the Verse episodes. Not only would the community be treated to stunning ship interiors and visuals, we would also see features that would be teased that have not been witnessed in either Squadron 42 and Star Citizen up until the current day.
Now starting work on new gameplay elements like suit punctures, oxygen recharging, and depressurization.
Perhaps it could be surmised based on the footage that this could indeed be a feature that has been brought in for Squadron, and it has been secretly developed just for that game so far and might migrate later to Star Citizen upon the release of Squadron. I think that this feature could be something truly amazing in the game that could add so much more to Star Citizen, adding a stress factor that you have to actually think about the kind of equipment you bring into space and what can happen if you get shot. And you probably have to have some sort of space duct tape and all that cool shit. Kind of like what we see in Metro Exodus or the Metro games in general, with having to duct tape our gas mask shut. I love that idea. Anyway, here's the Javelin. Famously, there'd been no Squadron 42 featured at Citizencon in 2017, and fans would have to wait until the holiday special a few months later in order to get their Squadron fix and update. Forgive me in advance, please. I could not help myself. I had to do this gag again.
Hello and welcome to sunny Los Angeles, which is also a lot warmer than Wilmslow in the UK. And we thought we'd introduce you to some of the team members of working on Squadron 42 that are based here in Los Angeles. So if you head in with me, I will take you inside. Well, not so sunny inside, but just office. We have Chris and Leia, who take the development area. Probably know David Haddock here at An Imperium, and Dave and Will both wrote the Squadron 42 script together over quite a while. Wild lines from Adam. It's a new team he just started about, Cherie from Lawmakers, and she takes care of all our, as well as Star Citizen. But the magic happens, and it springs from the imagination of Dave and Will.
Beyond the relentless clapping by Chris Roberts during the holiday special of 2017, the promised vertical slice mission was finally unveiled to the public, both with and without director commentary, showing us a great level of both fidelity, immersion, and detail. According to the developer commentary, they claimed that at least at the time that this was about a third into the game.
We'd be introduced to cloth tech, dynamic microwave tech, and most important of all, the community was frothing at the mouth as they could not wait to witness the story arc that Mop Man will go on, to see if they will find the budget to give this man a scrubbing machine, damn it. My god, I cannot wait dynamic mop play when... This is why they tease the Miscoraptor.
But of course, more importantly, during the events of the vertical slice, we can also see how the seamless transition from space to planet has worked itself into the game, which shows just how significantly the scope of the game had changed from its original pitch. Subsumption was first mentioned in 2015 during that year's Citizencon, but as it is further along at this stage, it is far better to discuss the feature in 2017 than 2015. From what can be discerned by viewing available footage, it could be deduced that how we speak to individuals on the ships we are stationed on will affect our relationship to them. But at the same time, one could hopefully assume that this system will not have a relationship meter, so the player will instead have to observe how the characters that they have chosen to interact with and form a relationship with respond to the player.
Lieutenant, I know you're about to head out, but I've been meaning to ask, how are you finding the Stanton so far?
Fine. It's been good, sir.
Glad to hear it. Stanton's a good place to start a career. She was my first posting, too. She's a hell of a ship, this one. Kelly said you performed well on your last mission. That's quite an auspicious start. Tell me about yourself. Do you have family?
I do. Yes, sir, I do.
That's good. Having responsibilities outside the Navy helps ground your thinking inside of it. But be careful. Time is one of those funny things. The older you get, the faster it seems to go. Last time I saw my son, he was getting his equivalency. Next week, he's graduating college. I couldn't tell you where that time went. Point is, I know that you're trying to make a career for yourself. But don't let it get in the way of the rest of your life.
That's good advice. You should do the same thing. Sir, have you thought about seeing him?
That would be complicated. I've kept you too long. You're dismissed, Lieutenant.
Which can assumedly mean that certain crew members can die. It would make sense for Chris to take a page out of Wing Commander's book and have that heavy consequence to the player's failure to act properly, or perhaps in time. Adding proper risk to gameplay. Consequence and reward. My word. Subsumption also enables the AI to have daily 24-hour schedules with certain objectives that they will try to achieve, all to breathe life into the ships the players serves on. And this is what makes dynamic microwaving come to life. After years of coexisting, sharing tech and talent, the hammer of justice would strike down upon CIG as CryTek filed a lawsuit against Cloud Imperium Games. Why did they do this, you may ask? Well, I will do my best to go through this. CryTek would allege that according to the deal that they had struck when Roberts acquired the engine was that they'd agreed to only produce one game. However, the agreement specifically states that the license entitles CIG to produce Star Citizen and its related space fighter game Squadron 42. Alongside this, the games were also described as together on the first page of the agreement. CryTek would also allege that Cloud Imperium Games were in breach of contract due to switching to another engine, Lumberyard, which is a modification of CryEngine, claiming that due to their agreement, CIG had the obligation to only utilize their engine. There would also be plenty of more minor points that were brought up, but they are less important. But this lawsuit would prove an unnecessary headache during the course of the development of the games that was already quite rough enough. Perhaps one could also argue that even though CryTek was in financial difficulties, an aggravating factor could also be CIG's incessant, shall we say, acquisitions of former CryTek talent. We will discuss the conclusion of the lawsuit and its culmination in 2020. 3 years away. 2018 would be yet another year of disappointment for fans, as instead of releasing, Squadron has been delayed once again.
The head of, the CD Projekt Red was talking about, how they, they stopped here, they refactored this, they redid this, they iterated, they did that, because that's
game development.
That is game development. It's also game development when you're reaching really high and you want a very high quality bar, and you're not sort of locked into, we've got to release for the Christmas quarter because that's what our shareholders need. And it is part of the process to make something really good. And, you can see it in Red Dead Redemption 2, which is like it was going to come out, now it's going to be later because they need a bit more time. Rockstar does this a lot. Blizzard does it a lot. We want to make a great game, so it takes time.
This time with the promised caveat that a beta was planned for 2020, only 2 years away. Which only added more fuel to the fire of the meme only 2 years away. Wondrous indeed. But perhaps one could discern a potential silver lining, that in spite of these delays, there was some hope on the horizon in the form of private equity. In 2018, a remarkable milestone was reached in Cloud Imperium Games history. These funds were supplied by the Calder family via their company Snoot Entertainment. The Calders would invest a total of $46 million into both Cloud Imperium UK and US. The investment was a bit eyebrow-raising for fans due to Chris Roberts' previous comments on publishers, and there was fear that CIG was perhaps in financial struggles or headed towards financial issues. But this was snuffed out by CIG explaining that the money was intended for Squadron 42's marketing budgets. The Calders, mainly the son of the duo, had an understanding for what CIG and Chris Roberts were trying to accomplish, and would not in turn act as a malevolent force in the background. This would seemingly go on to be proven time and time again, as the Calders had the option to make a return on their investment on several occasions, but have refrained from this. So as it stands, this investment does indeed appear to have been quite the boon and feather in CIG's cap. Around the Verse in 2018 featured several more in-depth episodes on both lore, art, and the game itself, and we shall now take a look at a few of these special Around the Verse episodes featuring Squadron 42. Welcome to The Coil featured a deeper look into the Coil, the massive cloud of asteroids, meteorites, and planet rocks and gas that inhabits the Odin system, being an immensely dangerous place for any man, woman, or ship to traverse through, being fraught with physical danger from the rocks and electrical danger from the cloud itself that can fry a ship's systems, or disintegrated if you fly into a rock. During the episode, we'd be treated to beautiful concept art of the coil alongside a look into the tech behind it and how it works. Sneakily at the same time, they would give us plenty of looks at the updated version of Arc on station from different angles as they were highlighting the cloud.
But how does it feel? How does it look at any point? Not just specific locations in the live stream, but also locations for the rest of the game as well. Like this is going to be a huge part of the game. So, and we've got a lot of content inside the coil. So defining how that looks and feels is important to us. Really late on in development, we're talking maybe a week or two before we went live. We had a direction change on it. What we had made was looking pretty cool, but it didn't feel menacing enough. It didn't feel. It felt too enjoyable.
The Living Idris is sadly not an episode about an Idris that comes to life as an Idris mecha god, but is instead a look into how the AI work on Squadron has progressed over the years. We see how the AI follow their schedules and have their own lives, so to speak, as they interact with the ship and the people around them. We'd also get a wonderful look at the uniforms of the UEE naval personnel aboard the Stanton, and how much thought has been put into it, taking plenty of inspiration from modern aircraft carrier personnel, even going so far as to having brought in actual flight crew to mocap the moves we see on display on the flight deck. Oh my, more conversations with Captain Onion as well.
Maybe even take a shower. One nice thing about the older engines on the Stanton, plenty of hot water to go round.
From janitor to flight crew, everyone has had an impressive amount of detail worked into them. And like they say during the vertical slice...
Yeah, and actually it even made the captures challenging because of all these AI doing very different things every time. It's not perfectly deterministic, so he's not always at the microwave actually getting himself, something to eat.
Dynamic microwave play. I can't wait.
Warmed in the microwave.
Reverse the Verse will be featured the first time in this documentary and likely the only time, as this show acted as its times to Star Citizen Live. But this one will be featured because this Reverse the Verse has a main focus on Squadron 42, featuring the Roberts himself. But to save on time, I will curate only the finest and most interesting of the questions and answers.
What's up with the F8 Lightning? What's to do with the F8 Lightning, Chris?
Well, I don't think anyone's actually read the concierge booklet, so you don't get the F8 Lightning until Squadron's out.
Mm-hmm.
Our actual idea is there's a few ships that we want to have you play Squadron, and if you get to the point in Squadron that you get to fly them, then you get the badge to be able to get that ship in the persistent universe.
What are our thoughts on the perks that can be transferred from completing Squadron 42 into Star Citizen? And we've already talked about the opportunity for an F7A or an F8.
Yes, so there's definitely, I've given an example of a couple of things where you do things and you'll sort of earn the badge or the ability in the game, in the PU, to get something that you wouldn't have done without doing that. And that also, there's some, relationships or things that you can do during the story of Squadron that if you do, it will unlock some missions or content, or people that will deal with you or sell you something in the PU. So and we kind of, the idea is the PU sort of is, the Squadron is something that, you did in the past and the PU is sort of in the present.
They're already asking about the next one. What are your plans for future chapters of Squadron 40? We're still working on this one. What are plans for future chapters of Squadron 42 and their tie-in with the persistent universe?
Well, I mean, the whole Squadron, it's a sort of it's a trilogy. It's a 3-game arc. Will be before the events will be sort of a little bit before what where we're setting the PU. So it will have the same kind of impact that we'll be unlocking new things. So kind of what we would do is we would be doing episode 2 or episode 3. We'll also be adding some opportunity or have content that could be unlocked if you've done that in the PU, sort of like the match of it. I mean, we are actually starting right now the very early stages of, we had an outline of, 1, 2, and 3, and now we're in the process of starting to flesh out 2 and 3, because our goal would be to get 2 and 3 written and then probably shoot all the performance cap back to back. And then once we have episode 1 out and done with all the technology there, 2 and 3 won't necessarily be, as long a process, right? Because we've had to build all this technology that didn't exist before. We really want to push it, and so we've been focusing on building tools. But once the tools are in place, 2 and 3 will. I mean, they're not going to happen in overnight, but they will happen a lot quicker than 1 did.
Will the coil be in the PU?
The coil will be in the PU. I mean, Odin will be in the PU.
A lot of questions about character customization in Squadron 42. I know with the roadmap out yesterday, we saw the first hints of character customization for Star Citizens coming in 3.1. Will it be the same system for Squadron?
It will be the same base underlying technology. I mean, the system, what will be in 3.1 is very basic. It's basically just switching between heads and hair and changing eye and skin color, which is not the final destination for that. I mean, the final one will be full on, you can change, morph the face. So we're still in progress on that side of the technology. It sort of ties into the kind of head rig that we talk about. We have this like real-time head rig, so it allows us to take any like performance and then map it onto any other head. I mean, we can have Gary Oldman driving the Thull, the Vandal Thull, and we've done that to have fun. And it's one of the things that allows us to do the faceware technology and stuff. But so there's still a fair amount of R&D, but the final version of that will absolutely be in Squadron. That's the plan, and you'll also see it in Star Citizen, and it's built in as part of the story. So essentially, what happened? There's a it is part of your journey to end up in a place that you need to choose what your face looks like.
What part, if any, of Squadron 42 will be cooperative?
Okay, so I know this was an issue from the beginning. Because the Squadron 42 story is as large as it is and has so much performance and is so particularly crafted, we can't do a cooperative story campaign.
Will we see any other big name actors in Squadron 42 that are not announced yet? Just say yes or no, don't.
Yes.
Okay.
Citizencon in 2018 was marked by yet another unforced error by CIG, and thusly a completely avoidable controversy. CIG attempted to monetize this Citizencon's livestream, putting it behind a paywall so only subscribers, paid pass holders, or concierge could watch the show past the keynote speech by Chris Roberts. This, as stated, drummed up a significant controversy within the community until the point where CIG would have to walk back this attempt at monetization and make it free for all. But the show is still not available on YouTube after all these years. Thankfully for this project, however, Citizencon 2018, which is quite difficult to track down, mind you, did not feature anything major on Squadron 42. But this would mark another blot in the record of CIG. In spite of a lack of Squadron 42 related content, the visual fidelity of the game would be shown off during Citizencon in 2018 with a cinematic teaser, it being the only major update on Squadron 42 during that Citizencon, showing the updated graphics and the cinematic experience that the game promised. The trailer also showing off new and updated versions of Gillian Anderson and Mark Hamill's character, but they'd continue to be iterated upon throughout the years.
I saw you apply to the Flight Academy again.
I'm your new wingman, sir.
Coil. Local scum use it for cover to launch attacks. This is their turf, so move when I'm moving. Keep your eyes open.
No southern moves.
Who the hell are you?
We're OMC. And OMC belongs to Citizencon. Is that your boss? Are we supposed to be scared of him or something? Yeah.
The OMC aren't the only ones listening into comms.
All ships, we're under attack by Vandal forces. Repeat, we are under attack.
There have been battles. There have been losses. Each and every one of you has proven yourself time and again. We will not lose the system. We will not fall back.
You got one. Copy that. Tally's on me. Let's say hi.
We will win. Because we have to.
As the development of Star Citizen and Squadron 42 has gone on, and one researches this topic more and more, you will come to find that a lot of information exists online in the form of text. A lot of text. And as we begin to find ourselves in what could be called the years of drought, or years of silence, we find that most updates for Squadron 42 exist in a textual format after a certain point. This makes it very difficult due to plenty of the reports simply reiterating the same things, such as, the AI team was indeed working on AI that month. I have refrained from using I for as long as possible, but I am becoming untethered and my rage knows no bounds. For I will not subject myself to those reports again. And thusly, yours truly will not subject himself to read every single monthly report, because I am simply put, not paid enough to do that. And I may be insane and obsessed with these games, but I am not that insane, nor that obsessed, yet. Interestingly enough, however, most of the things that they speak of during the monthly reports would be work that would eventually be put in trailers anyway. The end of an era arrived as Around the Verse was finally cancelled after having an impressive half-decade run with 200 episodes. It would go on to be replaced by Star Citizen Live and Inside Star Citizen, this time instead being spearheaded by Jared Huckabee. It would also mark the stepping back of Ben Lesnick and Sandy Gardner from being the forward-facing heads talking to the community. They'd still work with the company, but different roles. Warning, leak ahead. You have 5 seconds to decide if you wish to take part or skip to this timestamp to avoid it. During 2019, a leak occurred where a 9-minute video featuring Squadron 42's locations, ships, and even an early version of the later 2024 space battle. It had featured numerous previously unseen locations and alternate angles of ships attacking during the course of the space battle. Most of the things seen during the course of the leaks would not be seen again until the later I Held the Line trailer in 2023 and 2024 respectively. Like Star Citizen, Squadron 42 also had its own separate roadmap that the fans could use to attempt to read the tea leaves and manifest the current completion level of Squadron. But as we can see, it is rather odd. How is human combat AI V1 different from V2? I don't know, and oh look, the atmospheric flight model was done in 2019. So what's all the fuss about in later years? Oh yeah, they iterated on that too later. Oh wow. So the community would be presented with something being finished or delivered, only to then later be iterated on, changed entirely, or simply improved, making it very hard to discern how complete the game actually was.
Release of the roadmap, I have very much made sure and asked the team that what we put in there is what we can achieve with what we have right now.
Right. So that sounds like a little bit of a change from what you said earlier, where you said some of the scheduling and the predictions involved staff that hadn't been hired.
We try and learn. So believe it or not, so we that we got aggressive. We did the stuff, and we said, well, this time let's just put it in the roadmap, which is people feel is completely doable. And then with what we have right now, and then rather than not sort of say, okay, yeah, but we should have another team built by this time, so we'll be able to get this in the future. And so my hope is we will get some of the teams going, and then that will actually be able to mean that we can push some more stuff in.
Hey, everybody! So, welcome to Manchester.
To the great disappointment of fans, Citizencon in 2019 will not feature anything in regards to Squadron 42. No demo, no new cinematics or tangible updates, leaving fans to wonder until the 25th of December in 2019 for a short 3-minute and 40-second teaser trailer.
So we had coffee in the last Citizencon demo. So
yeah, well, again, this plays towards our actor status, which we'll get into a little bit later, where you will have to eat, you will have to stuff to stay alive.
No release date was ever hinted at or given, further leaving fans frustrated going towards 2020 and hopeful that the beta was still within reach. The 2019 visual teaser would be the most major official showcase of in-game assets, cinematics, and stuff in Squadron 42. The teaser displayed several interesting sneak peeks, even ships that would not be seen in-game for 6 years. The impressive visuals would all of course be in-engine and take visuals from all over, assumedly just the Odin system with some quick snapshots to the Vega space battle. So here we are. 2018 and 2019 had come and gone, and 2020 had finally arrived to the delight of fans in waiting of Squadron 42. But alas, everything was not as it would seem, for a cough of unknown and unspecified origin that shut down the world from 2020 up until around the end of 2022 had an effect on development, and probably your bank account. As with many other institutions, companies, or projects, progress slowed to a halt due to people having to shift from working in offices to working remotely. Alongside the cough of unknown origin, fans would soon come to find that the beta for Squadron 42 had indeed been delayed once more. This time, however, CIG could utilize the sudden outbreak of the cough across the globe as an excuse for the slowing of development. Thankfully, to the delight of fans, however, it was finally confirmed to us that rope tech would indeed make its way into the final product. Users on Reddit such as Elise93 celebrated wildly.
And there was much rejoicing.
To the joy of Squadron 42 fans, the briefing room would be launched, starting off strong with a 17-minute introduction and followed by an hour and 18-minute episode. It was intended to be a quarterly update show where fans would be able to get deep dives into the progress of Squadron 42's development and its process, whilst being shown and not told, like the roadmap or the monthly newsletters. A short compilation of scenes from the game is shown during the introductory episode. Several of these locations have previously been seen from the 2019 leak, but through different angles. Even some new things that we would not see again until 2023 and 2024, where some of these locations would re-emerge. The introductory episode, of course, features a lot of relentless and inconsequent yapping, so we are just going to skip all that. Throughout the episode, we are treated to the showcase of the first post-deployment mission the player character gets put on together with Commander Hamill. And we are treated to a display of the attention to detail that they are putting into every level and explain the functionality of the AI system. During the briefing room, we would also see further progress on not just subsumption, but how the AI function in the game overall.
So that's something we're still kind of like experimenting with at the moment, but what might be nice, for example, is if, say, again, you're in here, you kind of fight these guys and they're down to the last man and he's kind of on his own and he's struggling, you know, maybe he radios for support, and then in that case we could say the nearest kind of next zone, he's basically requesting help. And then something else which we've not kind of decided yet for this location, for example, but something we may do in other locations is if an enemy or a group of enemies are struggling, perhaps they call in like dropship support, and then, you know, an extra wave of enemies could kind of actually come to the location.
Here, the dev explains a potential effect combat will have on AI. Whilst perhaps not to the full extent, we'd see part of the conversation system and how the player's movement affect the eye movements of the NPC they're talking to, and then what occurs if you move too far away.
The entire face completely rebuilt afterwards. Lieutenant! Congrats on the big first mission. Exciting stuff. Lieutenant, you alright? Right, where was I? It must be great to finally feel like a real pilot. And not that you weren't a real pilot before, but now you've actually done something without blowing up. Never mind, I guess. The entire face completely rebuilt afterwards. Apparently the lieutenant looked completely different before Vega. Lieutenant! Congrats on the big first mission. Exciting stuff. It must be great to finally feel like a real pilot. And not that you weren't a real pilot before, but now you've actually done something without, well, blowing up. Lieutenant, you alright? Right, where was I? Speaking of pilots, did you hear what happened to Ishitaka last year? So, we were posted out in some backwater system. Oh, I forget which one. Maybe Nix. Anyway, we decided to go out drinking at this dumper of a trade station. Real dumb. Never mind, I guess.
Famously, only one episode of Squadron 42's briefing room would air. To the surprise of fans, the show would be ended almost as soon as it began. Why, you may ask? It appears during the introductory episode that Brian Chambers, the lead on Squadron 42 in Frankfurt, is in agreement with Chris that it's a cool and good thing to show work in progress levels, scenes, and stuff. But Chris decided to 180 on this choice quite swiftly. Perhaps Chris getting cold feet was right in the end, as it does give the false impression that the game was closer to completion than it was at the time. But to fans, this communication is confusing. How he mentions in the text how in normal games they don't reveal anything until 12 months before release? But what about open development? So ultimately, it was a shame that the player lost this potential avenue for more understandable updates, so development continued as usual, behind closed doors. But in any case, closing those doors may have been a good thing, because to be quite frank, the briefing room was fucking boring.
You know, where are you going? What are you doing? I thought we were talking, so that kind of
exactly.
Stuff. Yeah. And then it was, sorry, Nick?
I was going to say the whole focus obviously is just on maximum immersion, isn't it? I mean, that's, that's been Chris's remit from day one. That.
Now, after years of headache and worry, 2020 would mark the culmination of the CryTek vs. Cloud Imperium Games lawsuit. Thankfully to the fans and to the detriment of CryTek, Cloud Imperium would sort of win on most of the points. They won because they did not lose. But to dismiss further legal action from CryTek, Cloud Imperium and CryTek would instead opt for an undisclosed agreement. On March 24, 2020, the case was dismissed with prejudice, and CryTek would never be able to bring up the charges again. CryTek and CIG having to bear their own attorney's fees and costs, and CIG also gaining a perpetual license for CryEngine. 2020 would mark what I would personally consider to be the silent years, with the Cloud Imperium mostly shutting the doors on the overall status of Squadron 42. Continuing with the monthly updates, but progress was still unclear for backers. The roadmap's progress tracker is rather infamously difficult to gauge as to what the status of features, content, tech, and deliverables actually are, and how these systems depend on each other, leading to further confusion and frustration within the community that still vehemently supported Star Citizen despite its flaws, but still worried by the progress of Squadron 42. Chris would go so far as to compare the development of Squadron 42 and Star Citizen with the difficulties of going to the moon. Here we can also hear Nick Elms, one of the developers on Squadron 42 that you may or may not have seen during the course of this retrospective. But here he speaks on calling all devs about the status of Squadron 42 with Jared.
Cool. Now, we talked to Brian earlier about the roadmap and how difficult it can be to track progress on Squadron 42, at least publicly, without spoilers and stuff like that. We know that many aspects of Squadron 42 were developed in tandem with Star Citizen. What can we learn by looking at Star Citizen's development and apply that to where we think Squadron development is, or what we know about Squadron development?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, both Squadron 42 and Star Citizen are completely developed in tandem. So, what you're seeing in the flight model right now is what we have in Squadron. What you're seeing in the AI and the FPS side is what we have in Squadron. Again, that's something that we've actually seen as a big benefit for Squadron, because we can kind of refine that experience with the help of the backers. We can take the feedback of what people like and don't like and put it into Squadron and make sure that we're closer to the bullseye when the game comes out without spoiling anything, which is cool. We're not exactly where we want to be right now, but we're pretty close. We're getting closer by the day.
I think it's fair to say that that many people will share the sentiment that it is not where we want it to be. But as we
re-examine at the top of every year, find new ways to improve stuff. We've done things like create the vehicle experience team to help refine the flight model. We're going to talk to Francesco Riccucci about advances in AI that we've made a little bit later. I think we're really posed to make some terrific progress this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've had some really good hires, some new additions to the company that really made a difference in those areas.
And like I've mentioned previously, I will not be going in depth in regards to the monthly reports, but instead only pulling from the more interesting bits for your viewing pleasure.
A lot of videos being compiled by people and sent 3 or 4 gigabytes every day, relying on people's internet speed. Have you got it yet? I get a lot of that.
It takes a little more, a little bit more time than it did.
There you are, a fan in 2021, desperate for any new updates on the game that you have awaited for years, for crumbs or mere morsels of information to snack on as you wait. Alas, nay, all you instead receive are still lackluster monthly reports alongside of a roadmap that you are trying to discern what any of it actually means. You are frustrated. You are angry. You are hurt. You buy another spaceship. "2021 and onwards is, as previously stated, famous for the absolute lack of tangible updates for Squadron 42, which would only further be marked by CIG putting their foot down finally to say, it is done when it is done, and mostly shutting the door, doing away with their previously held belief of open development. It is, of course, to be entirely fair, not a terrible stance for a games developer to take. After all, in 2020 when Cyberpunk released, it was a complete mess which had been forced out through the pressures of publishers and fans alike. Averting such a disaster is, of course, in any game developer's interest, and doing what's best for the game and not the fans at that moment would have greatly benefited Cyberpunk. GTA 6 has also famously been delayed on several occasions as the developers have deemed it not ready, and have consistently pushed the release date forward, which makes perfect sense. It is more difficult, however, to swallow this pill in regards for Squadron 42, due to the simple fact that there are mostly no private investors behind this game, with the majority of its funding coming from the fan base. GTA 6 fans have no skin in the game, so to speak, as they have not put any money down to make it, and thusly they can harumph as much as they like, but it is not their money on the line. But in terms of Squadron 42, it is for good and all the backers' money that has been spent, and they want their game. For years upon years now, the game has been pushed forward and delayed after assurances by Cloud Imperium Games on several occasions that it would come soon, or in some cases even next year. They put themselves in the position where fans were rightfully angry that they had previously been so, quote, open with their development, but now instead merely stonewalling the fans without any further or proper updates as to when this game would actually be released. Citizencon in 2021 would be a relentless disappointment, as it doesn't really feature anything on Squadron 42, and it's basically just a yapathon for a lot of it due to the ongoing cough crisis. But it does feature some pretty cool stuff about Star Citizen, I suppose, but alas, nothing of the important stuff.
What the fuck is this?
Accountability is something that Cloud Imperium Games, Chris Roberts has struggled with since day one, because ultimately, he is responsible for what messaging his company and his games put out towards the community and the world at large. And after years of being forced to read a confusing roadmap and a series of lackluster monthly reports, in 2022, Cloud Imperium had had enough of fans asking when features previously promised for both Star Citizen and Squadron would be released. This would all culminate in the Roadmap Watcher controversy, where Cloud Imperium Games, not metaphorically, philosophically, or allegedly, but actually shat the bed in their communication with their fans. It got so bad that even outside news media took note of this unforced error by CIG. Whilst obviously not discouraging fans from funding, it did shake confidence in the project in large segments of the community that took some time for CIG to recover from. One could argue that they never really did recover the reputation that they possessed before. Of course, one could be accused of reading into it far too much, but upon having rewatched hours of content that CIG have put out over the years, I must say, in spite of all the innumerable examples of utter cringe and embarrassing moments, there was still an innocence to all this. And this innocence is something that faded and has almost disappeared in the current day. Their outward image is far more polished and clean, and marketing appears to hold a covetous grip over the company. Money keeps pouring in every year, and we have seen less and less of the man who founded it all. It was, after all, Chris Roberts' dream that began all this, and as time has progressed, at least I would accuse them of emulating more and more that same publisher mentality that he railed against. It is understandable that communication mess-ups doth occur in a company the size that An Imperium Games had grown into. It naturally, as a consequence, has a lot of moving parts, but so does a body, and if a waitress suddenly slaps a guest, you are still in a position to be fairly criticized for what the hand did. But as always, I'd encourage you to look back at the previous Citizencons around the verse and other Star Citizen media yourself and make your own mind up about this. But I find their behavior around the Roadmap Watcher controversy to be inexcusable.
Thought it'd be really useful to come by and tell you all about some of the subtle things and the gameplay aspects that we're working on that maybe you haven't heard from Todd or Tony or everyone else that in today and during the ISCs, because we sort of try to keep the Squadron stuff close to our chest to really sort of surprise and impress people when we do it. And so we thought, why don't we just come by and maybe just talk about little things, maybe show you a sneak peek of something here and there, and not everything, because we're trying to keep it close to our chest until it's really ready to let the baby out of the carriage and it's beautifully dressed and all the rest of it. But hopefully it'll give you guys some insight to what's happening, and also understand that a huge amount of the development resources, even if you think they're working on Squadron, are ultimately working on stuff that will be in the persistent universe.
Another year, another con. For 2022 truly had the yappiest of seasons in this saga indeed, with a 2-hour talk by the leading men themselves. Richard Tyra, who was the head of Star Citizen development, but who would also later go on to become the head of development of Squadron 42, would appear in this little session. And as we can see, he is of course joined by Chris Roberts to literally talk our ears off. Ultimately, all they yap about were things that we'd eventually come to actually witness and not be told about. Bloody hell, what was that called again? Ooh, Ascendant Station makes a return. Oh yes, reach out, grab the thing.
And also the big thing that Chris said there is it's systemic. There's no markup. If you want to go and climb all over a ship, you can do. If you want to climb over a space station, you can do. If you want to climb over anything that's in EVA, has a surface, you can put your hands on it. It's got a big enough space to put your hands on it. It will work.
The Ascendant Station would be shown again, being utilized to show the push and pull mechanics in zero gravity that we'd not see again until this year in 2026. Years had passed since the last proper showcase of anything Squadron related. In 2023, anxiousness was growing within the community as to the status and progress of the game. Release dates had been speculated wildly on forums such as Reddit and the Spectrum, but we were sadly none the wiser. In March of 2023, Star Citizen was struck by probably its most horrifying and infamous patch, 3.18, which several players still report after effects from. It was a time of 30Ks that would certainly never return, with instability and bugs like never before. And from an outsider's perspective, it must have been quite the sight to see that during this whole mess with Star Citizen and years of silence on Squadron 42, how Cloud Imperium Games managed to survive not just that, but also the cough. It is, upon retrospective, an astonishing feat that throughout the years, CIG, thanks to its fervent and ever-loyal fan base, that they managed to pull through the years of silence alongside broken patch after broken patch. Perhaps this is to be considered a testament to the community in Cloud Imperium to pull through even during the darkest of times. But hark, you bastards, forget all I just said before, because, my god, 2023 would be the year of years. After years of speculation, years of doubt, and questions regarding the status of Squadron 42, the answer would finally be given to the community at Citizencon in 2023 by Chris Roberts himself.
Hello? Hey, everybody. But one of the real reasons why we wanted to show you this Citizencon is because we've hit an inflection point on a lot of the features, as in they're either finished or they're in polishing stage, which is why we're showing them. So everything that we've been showing you here at Citizencon is our intention, not making 100% promise, just so everyone remembers that, to get them into Star Citizen through next year. So it's not going to be gated on having to be after Squadron 42. So we are... So we're planning over the Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 of next year. Hopefully everything that we've shown you, you will have in your hands playing inside Star Citizen. So, and it's very gratifying for the team and myself to finally be able to show you a lot of this. One of the advantages of being able to go and iterate on these features in Squadron was that we were able to do it without having to release every 3 months and make sure the old system worked while the new system was working, so we could actually really polish the features, which I hope you could see when we showed you the updated UI stuff, the updated FPS stuff, the updated flight stuff, the character stuff, which is something we're very proud of, because this is, after all, an MMO. You want to have as much freedom to create the character you want to create. So, as you may have guessed, and Brian Chambers may have let slip a bit earlier, we are feature complete on Squadron 42. I am not, you will not get a release date from me today, because first of all, you always get very angry at me when I give dates. It will be when I know that we're fully about ready to print the Gold Masters, but it won't be just yet. But we prepared, the Squadron 42 team prepared a small video for you. I may be lying, it's a bit bigger than small. To give you a glimpse of everything we've been working on and what the gameplay looks and feels like. So let's roll that.
Archangel 6, come in.
Go for 6.
I'm getting a faint contact on bearing 287. You picking that up?
Yeah, got it. Scanning that. We're clear. Commercial vessel under Vega 3. Provided that civilian traffic is restricted under lockdown.
Copy that.
Archangel, this is Krugeri.
Come back, Krugeri.
Redirect to sector 7 Bravo Echo for immediate tasking.
Copy that. On our way.
I know I just wrote you, but a couple of hours ago, proximity sensors on the other
side of the jump got twigged. Word is it might be that clan we've been battling with. I guess that last fight didn't scare them
off
off
quite like we all hoped it would. Honestly, we've been out here so long, I don't know what to pull for anymore.
I just wanted to let you know.
I'll write as soon as I can. Stay safe. Your loving son.
Never gets old, does it?
Sir.
Eddies. I used to do the same thing when I was first coming up. Post up to the flight deck whenever I could to watch the launches. Have you seen the F-8s up close?
No, sir.
The thing's a beast. Nimble, too.
12 maneuvering thrusters and 3 mains. It sure sounds like it. Sir.
Captain McLaren to the bridge. Captain McLaren to the bridge.
I saw you apply to the Flight Academy again.
Yes, sir.
Keep your head up. Took me a couple times before I got in.
Thank you, sir.
It would mark a far more than just triumphant return to form for Squadron 42 with stunning visuals, amazing graphics, and incredible fidelity, and excellent action. Finally, after 13 years of waiting, ropes were indeed confirmed and shown in the game.
All attachments into a single handheld device, and allows us to create really interesting challenges, including physics-based puzzles using our updated rope code.
Elise 93 literally evacuated his pants at Mark 16, sending him into orbit and shining so brightly he briefly became our second son.
And there was much rejoicing.
Asking, when can I play it?
When can I play it?
When we have the locked release date, you will be the first to know. Now we're in polishing phase on Squadron 42. You will start to see a lot more things coming to Star Citizen, as well as overall progress on the persistent universe. The polish phase can take some time. We have come this far, and we want to make sure Squadron 42 delivers on the promise of being this generation's wing commander. Now, even though there's only a few of us in this video, I'd like to extend a big thank you to all our staff around the globe who have been putting their heart and soul into bringing Squadron 42 to life. And I would like to thank everyone in the community for your patience and your support. To paraphrase Admiral Bishop, when people ask, what did you do in the development of Squadron 42? you can look them in the eye and say, I held the line. I'm proud to stand with you. Thank you for making this game with us.
Oh, for the love of God. It is fair to say that this announcement reinvigorated the community to an absolute fever pitch, which saw funding increase year on year with no real sign of stopping. It included everything the players had hoped for, a highly cinematic and interactable experience, breathing new life into the space sim/space opera genre, at least this segment of the community. And speaking from a personal note, the feeling and sense that I got from the community when Squadron 42 was announced as feature complete was almost that the entire or most of the community forgot all about those years of missed deadlines and all those broken patches, even though Chris didn't flat out state a release date. This also showed in the money-making, which practically only increased year on year yet again, with absolutely no sign of stopping to this day. Chris Roberts and Cloud Imperium Games are a marketing juggernaut, to say the least. Do you perchance remember way back when, during the course of this documentary in 2013 and 2014, a studio that CIG had outsourced development to was in Mexico? And that this studio was primarily focused on making the ships? Well, dear viewer, that is about to pay off. I'm not saying that CGBot did this, but for some reason a model of the RSI Galaxy was leaked by someone and then featured in a Mexican Super Bowl commercial. You can't make this stuff up. In 2024, during Citizencon, we would yet again see more iterations on the appearance of Gary Oldman and Gillian Anderson.
I saw you apply to the Flight Academy again. I saw you apply to the Flight Academy again. I saw you apply to the Flight Academy again.
We will not lose the system. We will not fall back. We will win because we have to. We fight today. So in 40 years from now, when you're surrounded by everything and everyone you hold dear, and they ask, what did you do?
Mark, look, I made a mistake.
A mistake?
Yes.
With the 1 hour 2024 gameplay reveal of the Squadron 42 prologue. They have had really fun playing around with them for years, with hair colors, wrinkles, and beards and whatnot. Perhaps this will be the final version? Nah, there is so much more to change.
My favorite.
The Battle of Vega is shown almost in its entirety during the course of the video. We also get to see the first on-screen appearance of the Xi'an during the trailer at the end of the gameplay video. A fun fact is that the Vega system is a reference to the Vega sector in Wing Commander. And we finally got to see more of the push and pull animations previously spoken about all the way back at PAX a decade earlier in 2014. Interestingly enough, here we can observe the likely rehearsal for the stunt work during the prologue where Gillian Anderson meets a sharp stick.
We're good. Down! Captain.
One does feel quite a bit of a catharsis seeing all this work come to fruition after all these years, especially after having revisited everything before this.
Go.
All right, people. 5 seconds out to the fray. Form up, Cal. You got point.
Copy that. Tally's on me.
So to highlight this new era of Squadron 42 in 2 years, CIG revamped their Squadron 42 newsletter from a monthly report to a quarterly newsletter instead. These newsletters would be met with enthusiasm that would ebb and flow with each release. From top-secret Vandal transmissions that the fans got to translate, to a big outdated map of the Odin system where, remember, they said 90% of Squadron 42 would take place, to an interview with a random crewman. When writing this, however, I came to the realization that perhaps the focus on this random crew member was a sneaky hint by CIG about the depth of detail we could expect from even the most secondary of characters. Overall, the quality and appearance of the monthly reports are usually excellent, but the content is what was lacking overall. One of the best ones, however, is one that highlights the excellent music for the game and how it further embellishes the world. Also within this lies a potential spoiler, so I'll be very careful and give you 5 seconds to skip ahead to this timestamp to avoid the spoiler. As we can see here, Gary Oldman has a rather heartbroken expression on his face in this scene. This can of course be due to Admiral Bishop feeling immense loss at the thousands of Navy personnel and hundreds of thousands of killed civilians on the planet's surface. Seeing as he placed his hand on this particular casket of all those in the room, this could potentially hint at the death of Captain McLaren, Ernst Bishop's daughter, aka Gillian Anderson's character. But it is of course pure speculation and it could be due to several causes, but I find the assessment that it is McLaren highly likely. During a tech talk with Benoit from Turbulent during our Star Citizen Live in 2025, Jared would be faced with several people asking about Squadron 42 and its status. Naturally, many fans were once more hyped and happy and holding the line, eagerly awaiting Citizencon 2025 that'd soon be upon them. Jared would, however, be faced with a difficult task of informing the community that in spite of fervent speculation, there'd be absolutely no Squadron 42 presence during this year's Citizencon. But during his explanation, it can be said that he goofed a little. Although being firm on the no-show for 2025 Citizencon, it was still strange as he appeared so confident that they were doing everything to reach the lauded 2026 goal.
Because of the impending release of Squadron 42 in 2026 and the need to let those people focus on that and getting that closed out and whatnot, we were going to allow the engineers that remained on, their focuses remained on Star Citizen, to take a step back from new feature work and look at hardening and fixing and addressing a lot of the long-standing issues.
And during the course of the tech talk, Jared also brought down the hammer to state firmly about CIG's full focus on meeting the 2026 target.
I do want to say, if you are some more things about Citizencon Direct, if you're a subscriber to the Squadron 42 newsletter that went out, that just went out with a map of the Odin system, there was a note at the end there about the Squadron 42 team still being heads down and working on that. I want to second the information there, and I want to star explain. I'm going to star explain the information that was there. There will be no Squadron 42 presence at Citizencon Direct this year. So just in case there was any kind of people were like, I didn't quite understand the message, or maybe the message wasn't fully clear and whatnot, and if it wasn't, maybe that was on us. That team is heads down. We drew a line in the sand when we said 2026. I don't know if we're going to make it. I just know that we're going to do every single thing possible to make it.
To the disappointment of many a fan, Squadron 42 was indeed a no-show for 2025. All that was left to fans was simply the grinding wait. But as we had come this far, as we had waited this long to get to this point, another year doesn't matter, right?
This is the room where we have lunch every day, and if you get here early enough, croissants, if the weapons team hasn't stolen all of them. Over here, we got some cool mannequins representing different aspects of the game. You got the ever-present, Hurston security armor over here. That's really cool. You got your Dusters armor right here. You got this guy from a game that we're not talking about today.
Finally, a decade later, we had made it. The community has stuck with CIG through thick and thin and has entered the launch year of Squadron 42 in 2026. But many of us were lost along the way. Think back to those people who died waiting for a game they believed would be released before their time came to a close. Think back to all those friends which you swore up and down to that in your little Aurora Legionnaires that you would conquer the stars together and carve out your own place in the verse. Where are those friends now? Some, of course, moved on with their lives, tired of waiting for a day that seemingly still may never come. But we are here now, and all that is left for us is to hope and cope that perhaps this will indeed be the year of years. But of course, even though the year is not done yet, there are still a couple of things for us to talk about. The Buyback Controversy is a hell of a way to kick off a marketing campaign, let me tell ya. People were fuming at the possibility that they would no longer be able to snatch a potentially soon-to-release AAA or, dare I say, quadruple A title for as little as $15 to $40. These individuals that evidently did not hold the line were shocked, and part of the community went into meltdown. In the Star Citizen hangar on the RSI website, you can melt certain ships, items, and even the games down for store credit. But if you do that, you can't actually play or access those games, FYI, don't do it. These items are usually always placed in the buyback section of your hangar, where you have the option for an uncertain time to buy these things back, which then of course means you do not own them, which the individuals that decided to melt their copy of Squadron 42 didn't seem to grasp. These people genuinely believed that CIG would let them keep an unknown number of cheapo copies of Squadron 42 for as low as $15, meaning that people could sell these copies for far cheaper than CIG could, meaning that CIG would have to compete with their own previously sold stock of Squadron 42 copies, which is of course insane that anyone would think that they would allow this. People were also angry at the fact that they received no warning that this was going to happen. But they did. For 2 years, since 2024, they have stated launches in 2026, which was clearly stated at the bottom of every quarterly newsletter as well. They were even warned a full 2 weeks before Squadron 42 was removed from the buybacks. And as it would turn out, it was an unintentional bug, but at least partially that the buybacks were removed. It wasn't meant to blanket and cover all items in the buybacks, just the copies of Squadron 42 that were in the buybacks. They did not hold the line, so they suffered the consequences. Fucking deserters. One would of course be a fool to suggest that GTA 6 will not have any sort of effect on the release of Squadron 42. GTA will be a thermonuclear bomb once it releases onto the gaming world, and its impact is likely to be beyond immense. It is a cultural juggernaut of which like we rarely see. But I must bring forward that I believe it may not possess as much of an effect on Squadron or Star Citizen as people like to believe. Even Chris Roberts was very confident of the success of his games, like he stated years ago.
Just to talk a little bit about Squadron 42, I would put it up next, just as a standalone project, next to any AAA, big publisher, big budget game. I am 100% confident that it can go toe-to-toe with any of those games and, come out on top. Well, if you like space games, that is.
Chris Roberts believes fully in his game, his product, and perhaps even his life's work. And there is reason to believe that Squadron 42 can stand on its own in spite of the shock of GTA 6. due to the fact that the player base does have overlap in one regard, but not as much as people would like you to believe. I think it is much easier to see how a Squadron 42 player could find themselves buying and playing GTA 6, but can you say the same for a GTA 6 player picking up and playing Squadron 42? A space sim enjoyer is highly likely to enjoy both games, as GTA has always had mainstream appeal, but the space sim has always been a niche since its inception. It could also be argued that GTA 6 will probably launch as GTA 5 did, as a console exclusive for the first year, with a later PC port coming out a year or some other time later. So the sticking point, at least in my mind, are games journalists. Games journalists have never really been all that favorable towards Star Citizen, Squadron 42 or Chris Roberts, often frothing at the mouth at the easy articles they get to write about X $100 million raised with no release in sight articles. Of course, these journalists will probably give far more attention to GTA 6 than Squadron 42 anyway, so I would argue they are irrelevant. Because Squadron, Star Citizen, and Chris Roberts' power comes from the fact that he was able to promote and rally a community through word of mouth alone. And through word of mouth again is how Squadron 42 will flourish. Because if you have any interest in space games, space sims, or epic stories or space operas, you want to give this game a try. After the Buyback Controversy, CIG appears firm in the belief that they can reach that ever-elusive release date in this year of 2026, even going so far as to adding Squadron 42 to the game section on the store, which it previously was absent from. Alongside some updates on the Squadron 42 page, it can be surmised that these are the early days of a marketing campaign where they can probably add a release date or a trailer or something completely different. And for this year, Invictus launch week was moved to Seoul entirely this year, meaning that Drake DefenseCon is picking up the slack. It could also be like some of my friends argued that it could be moved until later in the year, meaning that it could potentially replace the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo for this year. Remember the last time we saw Seoul mentioned by CIG? It was during the I Held the Line trailer. So, Invictus launch week in Manchester then? Does this confirm SquadronCon in October? I will let you make your own mind up on that. Rather suddenly towards the end of April in 2026, Brian Chambers would depart Cloud Imperium Games after having been a part of the company for 11 years. Which is rather strange, as the game that he has worked on for all this time is coming out this year. Would it not make sense for him to stay at least until it lands before he moves on? It is a strange move that could be caused by several factors, but until he reveals it or someone else does, all we can do is speculate. Again, newsletter subscribers were faced with the nose-pinchability of some of the quarterly reports. The feeling within the community towards the quarterly reports were a mix of quick interest to then be faced by a wall of apathy, with the ones on display at the start of the release year truly being a sloppy mess that an intern surely put together in the span of 5 minutes. Someone procrastinated the March of 2026 newsletter, and you can't convince me otherwise. Yes, this interview was in February, but there is still reason to worry a little bit at the split communication that is, mind you, only 3 months apart. But it's still important as it shows CIG is still very much a mixed signal generator when it comes to their intentions and how we must remain cautiously optimistic. Jared, however, came out around the same time as when the interview was posted to reiterate that 2026 is still very much the year to be Squadron. And thusly, as this is the most recent statement by CIG, it must be concluded that it is confirmed for Q3 or Q4 in 2026.
And in that new DefenseCon spirit of sharing things early, let's carry that over and talk about the rest of 2026 for a bit. Now, throughout the remainder of this year, we intend to deliver the newly reworked and fully instanced debut of Siege of Origin, the new Genesis-built planets of the Nyx system, Starware and Starkitect goodness, the enormous multi-staged instance municipal works operation, a whole bunch of new ships and vehicles and additional gameplay features and quality of life improvements. There's an Apex Sandballot car that can literally pop its head out at any moment. And of course, as if anybody could forget, Squadron 42. There's a lot we got going on for the remainder of this year. And for that reason, we've made the decision not to host a Citizencon event for 2026, either in person, digital, direct, or otherwise. It's a decision born out of how important these two games are to everyone on both sides of these projects.
And here, dearest viewer, we have come to the end of our story. After the very long and arduous process of researching and documenting Squadron 42's history, I can finally say that I am complete. I am satisfied that I've done my best to maintain as objective of a stance as possible, and I hope throughout that this has indeed been the case and that you feel the same. Some things may of course be embellished for the sake of comedy, but the truth beneath must in my mind always be respected. This has been a journey of journeys that I'm more than happy that I was lucky enough to get the chance to complete this as my unemployment draws to a close. It's been a wonderful experience to go through all these years again, reliving a lot of great and terrible memories along the road to make sense of this crazy roller coaster that we're all on. I wish to reiterate that I still very much love this project, and I wish desperately for it to succeed, but I cannot hide from the sense of frustration that they have given me. Through the missed deadlines, constantly blazing through the path ahead with no regards as to what they were actually doing. And as I see it, it never really appeared as if they had a plan on what they were doing after a certain point due to the feedback loop of funding and feature creep. The project became, or has become, an Ouroboros or a Jormungandr that is constantly eating itself and rejuvenating itself. It's understandable also that their level of polish, experience, and marketing got better over time, but I do still miss the optimism of the early days, and I wish that they'd go back to that more innocent CIG. I know it's hard to be an innocent billion-dollar company, but at least try a little bit. I still expect clearer communication, of course, as that is what we are owed, as this is still supposed to be a project in the category of open development, and from what I've been able to research, they have been closing the doors on development more and more. But ultimately, from all that I've seen and heard, I think that Squadron 42 will be a fantastic game. I think it can be proven with the evidence that I provided over the course of this work, and also from my gut feeling, or vibes, if you wish to call it that. Perhaps I may even manifest its greatness, but I do indeed believe that they have been cooking, and we are in for something special. If there are any major updates to Squadron 42 and its progress, I will of course make follow-up videos, perhaps calling them an addendum to this work, as a bit of a series. But the last major update I expect to see from Squadron 42 this year, however, will be a release date and/or a trailer. Even if you were only here for a quick pit stop to hear all about Squadron 42, I appreciate you taking the time to watch my work, and I appreciate you for sticking with me for this long until the very end. Thank you again very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you do feel so inclined. And if you wish to support me financially, you can do so on Ko-Fi or by becoming a YouTube member. Thank and bye.
And then we get some drinks, and I'll be there and sign things, and okay.
I just know that we're going to do every single thing possible to me.
I'll bet you stay up late nights just polishing it, huh?
Which is obviously why it's going to take a little longer than we originally thought, but I think...
Sit back in your seats. This is going to be a hell of a ride. Take care.
I hope you've enjoyed everything you've seen in these last 2 days.
I found it hard to say admirable Bishop. See, I can't do it.
If you asked me when I started this, if you'd be talking to me 14 years later, still not finished, and but everyone, it's going stronger than ever, and there's more and more people than ever that are playing it and supporting it, I would have probably thought you were crazy.
Attention, fleet! This is Admiral... Sorry, I'm not used to acting. Attention, fleet!
This is Admiral Bruce. Attention fleet, this is Bishop. You are ordered to immediately withdraw.
Who the hell are you?
So we got about 4 hours on the live stream. We're gonna show you some stuff, talk about some stuff. Here we go.
You guys out here who are beautiful, wonderful, early adopters, willing to put up with bugs, jankiness, not a great new player experience. We know all those things are things that we want to fix and improve, and we want a game that everyone can just get into at the beginning, understand it, have fun, pulls you into it, and then has a huge amount of depth.